Good morning, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. So this is part one of examining the debate, did Jesus rise from the dead? So this is a debate between Bart Ehrman and Jonathan Sheffield. And so everyone knows who Bart Ehrman is. And so if you don't know who Jonathan Sheffield is, he's actually debated Bart Ehrman quite a few times. And Jonathan is a Textus Receptus guy as well, which is very encouraging for the Textus Receptus community. He's done quite a lot of really good work over the years, reaching out to the agnostic, atheist, skeptical community. And so you might know Jonathan Sheffield from this channel. I've had him on and we've discussed quite a few different topics. You might also know him from a few years back. He did a lot of cartoons about, or animations, I should really call them, about James White and Bart Ehrman and Dan Wallace. And so you would often see these guys doubting the word of God, and Jonathan Sheffield would bring forward an argument to counteract what they were teaching. And so what I thought was I'll go through this debate. And one thing is, when you're listening to Jonathan Sheffield, he is debating in quite a unique fashion. And so it's not just the average sort of stuff that can be considered as just sort of the average apologist's answer for things. He's very well versed in the early church writers, but also in the historical writings of that era. And so he has quite a unique position. So one thing that can happen when you're listening to someone who is saying quite a lot of information is you can tend to vague out if you don't know a few people's names, or you're not really understanding where he's reading from. Or if he's mentioning someone like Plutarch and you're like, oh, I sort of know his name, I don't really know what he's written about this issue. Or what I really want to do is go through this and study it. And so I think that'll be very helpful for us. So we'll go through anytime someone's mentioned who could be a little bit of a curveball at you in your intellect. Because the thing is, if you don't understand what's being said and you're only getting half the picture, you don't know the strength of the argument. And this is one of the things when I'm examining debates, like, say, for example, when I examine James White and Jack Mormon was making very good and precise argumentation, where James White was using theatrics, using his charisma. He was also acting and rolling his eyes and doing all sorts of theatrics, like I said. And instead of having a good argument, he would try and win you over. Where Jonathan's not like that. He would just say, here's the information, there you go. Where Bart Ehrman is more theatrical. He's a bit more like a James White type of character. And so we will examine all the claims being made, but we really want to look at what Jonathan Sheffield has said, because at the end of this debate, Bart Ehrman said that this was one of the strongest evidences ever presented to him about the resurrection, which I think is quite remarkable. And one of the things in this channel, oftentimes we're talking about textual criticism, talking about different versions of the Bible and things like that. But I've been putting my toe in the water of some of these atheist groups, agnostics, skeptics, the myth vision guys. I'm tuning into them a little bit more, watching their stuff. CJ Cornthwaite, Dan McClellan. Obviously, I listen to Bart Ehrman stuff all the time because he is one of the world-leading experts in variants and textual criticism and all the rest of it. So I want to understand what the other side is saying and not misrepresent them. But what I'm finding is we, as Textus Receptus people, we actually have a stronger apologetic, because we know where our Bible is. We're not confused about what the Bible is or where it is. We know what the Bible says about itself. We are very strong in our bibliology. And so this is the area that they're attacking. They're attacking the bibliology. They're attacking the area, like saying there's contradictions in the Bible. Well, it depends which Bible you're reading. If you're reading an NIV, ESV, there are contradictions. I can show you them. But if you're reading the King James, there are no contradictions. If you're reading from a Textus Receptus foundation, you don't have those problems. And so oftentimes someone like Bart Ehrman or someone who's just going through seminary, they learn about all this stuff, and to them, they just think that that's the way that life is, and they end up following Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, end up following Westcott and Hort, the Academy, the Nestle Alarm group of texts, and believing that Jesus was quoting from the Septuagint, all this sort of stuff. And some TR people are a little bit mixed about that. But most of the things that critical text people believe actually cause them to doubt the Word of God. And then that doubt is just at different degrees. So some people will, they will still remain in a church, but they think the Bible has problems. And so we're still trying to constantly reconstruct. So they're working at reconstructing, or they're supporting those who are reconstructing, or they just admit, hey, we got problems in our Bible, we're reconstructing it. Or many times these people will actually leave the church and they will become agnostic or atheist, like say C.J. Cornthwaite. He said he left, but then he sort of thought, I kind of like Christianity. So now he's saying, I am still a Christian, but I don't believe it. and it's like, well, why would you hang around? It's a bit like hanging around the vegan conventions or something and you're eating meat. It's like, well, what's the point, But this topic it's a very interesting topic because I guess in my early Christianity, because I became so convinced in the reality of God, like coming from atheism, having a conversion experience, being tuned on to the things of God all of a sudden, reading the Word of God, having a relationship with God. Some of these bigger questions like, does God exist, or did the resurrection happen? You're sort of like, well, of course, you either believe it or you don't. And so trying to prove this sort of stuff, when in my early days, I'm like, well, what's the point in this? But because so many voices have come out against this type of thing, and so many people are interested in what atheists, agnostics have to say about this topic, that we really should have an answer. And oftentimes, I guess in a way, I've seen this as kind of simplistic. I would rather deal with the minutiae of technical things that I guess are more solid, things that Christians would believe. Say, like even the whole concept of evolution, like I think is, completely fanciful. And so I would, I used to believe in evolution. So when I would go out witnessing and street preaching and things like that, I would have an argument against evolution, but I really have no interest in studying it and thinking about it because I used to believe it, and now I realize how silly it is. And so it's one of those things where you only really are learning it so you can tell others, And I guess, say with the resurrection, is God real? These type of topics, for me personally, it's never really been something that, I'm at home, like studying these things out and going, well, did the resurrection really happen? How can we prove this type of thing? Because there are some things in the Bible you either believe that it happened or you don't. And but there are skeptics out there. There are atheists or agnostics, other religious groups. Obviously, if Jesus didn't die on the cross, like the Muslims say, how can he rise from the dead? It was very heavily emphasized in Scripture that Jesus did rise from the dead. I think it's an amazing topic. I think we need to learn more about this. And so one thing that is really good about going through this is because Bart Ehrman has said that this is the best case he's ever heard for the resurrection. Going through and studying this, if you can get some of these things under your belt, whether you're on I don't know where people's headspaces are at. Some people can be struggling with, did Jesus actually rise from the dead? For me, it's not a struggle. I'm just like, yeah, of course he did. The Bible says it, but other people can be like, that's the one hurdle that I can't get over, sort of thing. But we're just going to study through this, and we're going to try and learn as much as possible. And I guess in a way, sort of adopt some of the things that Jonathan Sheffield is saying. And he does have a unique way of bringing things across. And so we don't want to just go with the charisma of the debater. We don't want to just go with, whether they're smooth talking and fast talking. We want to go through and examine what's actually being said here. And we want to be seekers of truth. I don't want to be lied to. I don't want to have deception in my life. And I'm sure you don't either. And so, we want to go through this with an open mind, with an open heart, and say, let's all learn together. And so Anchor David is in the house, and he says, without the resurrection, Christianity falls apart. Hilly Billy says, Judas hung himself. John lived long as custodian of Mary, Mother of Christ. The other 10 apostles all died martyrs' deaths. They could have avoided by renouncing the truth. The question we have to, and I think it's continuing, but that's a very good point. And this is one of the things about the authenticity. People, why would you die for that? This is a major thing. This caused huge upheaval in the Middle East, huge upheaval in Judaism. It caused these people to be at times ostracized, but also they've broken from their traditional Jewish roots, and they're going to places like India, and they're going to places like Turkey and Greece and Rome and Spain, these other places, and hanging around a whole bunch of Gentile people. Why are they doing this if what they witnessed wasn't true? Why would you go to that length? And unless there's just this gravy train of money, or people do things for certain reasons. But when you look at the reasons why these early Christians were doing things, a lot of the time they were just getting persecuted. Wherever Paul went, he just got bashed. And so that's pretty much a good indication of how these other guys were getting treated. Like it says here, 10 of the apostles died, martyrs' deaths. That's huge. That's a massive thing. And so Hilly says, what we have to ask is how many men will willingly die to protect what they knew was a lie. And that's one of the interesting things about what's his name? Not Chuck Missler, Chuck. Now I might have gotten his first name wrong, and that'll destroy my memory. But the guy who was at the Watergate scandal, and he actually became a Christian. Now he became a Christian, sort of like a Billy Graham type of Christian, ecumenical, love the Catholics and all that sort of stuff. But he actually came out and said, the whole Watergate scandal, he said there were like I think like a dozen guys involved with that who were high up. And he said none of us could keep the story straight. That they were all like having problems with their stories, and some of them just came out and said, yeah, it's all a load of rubbish. This is what happened. And he said it opened his mind to when the disciples, when they're facing death, surely they'd say, okay, it's a load of rubbish, or there would be testimonies of this from at least one of them, but none of them did. They all died because of their belief, which is quite amazing. Chuck Colson, that's it. Thanks, David. I read his book when I was first a Christian back in the 90s. Jonathan Sheffield, James Sheffield, is Jonathan's father, and often frequents these videos. He says, thanks for doing this, blessings. Yeah, and I thought this was very good and very well done. So obviously this goes for 2 hours and 40 minutes. So it's going to be a 7, 8, 9 part series, and we're just going to take as long as it takes. We're not going to rush through it, but we do want to get down into the details, which might even take a little bit longer than usual. And, you know, I might get through 3 or 4 of them and go, let's just do a different program, you know, just throw a different one in and then get back to it. But I know that there is another debate that happened before this, which was who wrote the Gospels. So that would be an interesting one to go through as well. And also some of Jonathan's earlier material. I did go through another one. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago that he debated Bart Ehrman on a certain topic. I thought it was well done. I didn't think it got enough support from the Textus Receptus community as it probably should have. And I really take my hat off to Jonathan for debating people like Bart Ehrman. And, you know, obviously this takes a long time. When you're debating someone like Bart Ehrman, you've got to know your stuff, regardless of whether you think Bart's, you know, a brainiac or, you know, a really smart guy, or you think he's, you know, just deceived and he's got all these weird ideas. Regardless, you've got to learn all those things to be able to combat what's being said. And so obviously Jonathan Sheffield has done his homework, and so we take our hat off to him for that. So I think we'll just get straight into this. The debate that was going to happen on this channel between Bible Highlighter and Bible Protector has been shifted through to perhaps the end of this month, or maybe even a little bit later. The guys just weren't 100% ready to do that. And so that was going to happen last weekend. So that's why I just, I didn't really say much. I just entered into a video and just did my own thing. But I just sort of mentioned that some people were asking, you know, where's this debate that was supposed to happen? And so I'll let you guys know. I'll advertise it. I'll put it on the Textus Receptus Academy. So let's get straight into this. So this is on Facts. So Facts is by Stephen Boyce. So Stephen Boyce, he grew up a fundamentalist Baptist in that type of group. He does claim that he was a King James onlyist, and I guess more so gravitating toward a TR position. And he has pretty much gone from there, gone through to, adopting the critical text. And then he's joined the Anglican movement, which Jonathan Sheffield is part of that as well. But then he seems to have gone right over to pretty much Roman Catholicism. So I've debated Stephen Boyce on Revelation 16:5 and also the woman caught in adultery. That was probably about 5 years ago now. And this has only just occurred. It's on March 2nd. So let's get straight into this. I'll just check all the vitals. Got some audio happening. Okay.
Welcome, everybody, to this live debate on Facts. Good to see everybody in the live audience today. We're going to have a special one. My name is Dr. Stephen Boyce, and it's my privilege to serve as the moderator and host of this channel for tonight's debate. Did Jesus rise from the dead? This question stands at the very center of Christian proclamation. It's shaped theology, philosophy, history for over 2 millennia. The resurrection is not merely a devotional practice to many. It is a historic claim, and it invites people to investigate, scrutinize, and have serious dialogues like this. And so tonight is no exception. We're honored to have 2 really special hosts that are coming in with their arguments after spending many, many years of their own personal engagement and study and dialogue on this subject, answering the very question of our debate, did Jesus rise from the dead? Our first panelist is Dr. Bart Ehrman, and our second is Jonathan Sheffield, and we'll be bringing both of them in on the stage. Looking forward to have them both here, and I'm going to go ahead and bring in both of them now. Gentlemen, so good to have you both back for round 2 of our debates on this channel.
Well, thanks for having me.
Excellent. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do our introductions. Our first panelist is Dr. Bart Ehrman. Dr. Ehrman is a James A. Grade Distinguished Professor of Religious Studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where he has taught since 1988, recognized internationally for his scholarship on the New Testament and early Christianity. Dr. Ehrman has written or edited 33 books, including 6 New York Times bestsellers. His college-level textbook, The New Testament, Historical Introduction to the Early Christian Writings, has remained the best-selling text in the field for more than 25 years. His scholarly work has been published by Oxford, Harvard, Yale, and other premier academic presses, and his books have been translated into 27 languages, reaching millions of readers worldwide. And beyond the classroom, Dr. Ehrman is widely recognized as a public scholar. He has produced 9 acclaimed courses for the Great Courses, in addition to numerous online courses available throughout bartehrman.com. His books and courses have sold more than 2 million copies. He also writes for a charitable blog, the Bart Ehrman blog, which has raised millions for organizations addressing poverty, homelessness, and hunger. In addition, he hosts a weekly podcast, Misquoting Jesus with Bart Ehrman, available on YouTube and all other major platforms of podcasting, where he brings cutting-edge biblical scholarship to global audiences. Defending on the other side of this, the historicity of the resurrection from an Anglican perspective, we have Jonathan Sheffield, known as the Anglican Autodidact. Jonathan Sheffield hails from Brooklyn, New York, and was born and raised in an Anglican communion home as a member of the Episcopal Church. He is a veteran of the armed forces, having served 4 years in the United States Air Force. While Jonathan holds an MBA and an undergraduate degree with coursework in computer science, accounting, and statistics, he is an autodidact in church history and a Christian apologetics. Since 2016, he has participated in many notable debates, advocating his thesis on the reliability and historicity of the Bible, including engaging men like Rabbi Tovia Singer, also Dr. Bart Ehrman, Dr. Mark Goodacre, also one of Dr. Ehrman's good friends, Dr. Robin Faith Walsh, Dr. Richard Carrier, Dr. Josh Bowen, and other PhDs in their field of expertise. All right, gentlemen and audience, here's the format. Each will start with a 25-minute opening. Jonathan will go first. Dr. Ehrman will go second. I will notify them with a 10-minute or with a 2-minute warning as they approach that 25-minute, just to kind of signal them. And then after each gives their introduction, there will be a 10-minute rebuttal by each person. That'll be Jonathan first. Dr. Ehrman will be second. Then there's going to be 2 separate rounds of cross-examination that'll be about 10 to 12 minutes of each panelist engaging and examining the other, and that'll be Jonathan, Dr. Ehrman, Jonathan, Dr. Ehrman, in that order. And then there's not going to be a closing. Rather, we're going to leave the last 20 or 25 minutes open for questions from the audience. Now, just a word about that really quickly for those in the audience. Time is limited on this, and so we're only going to take really anything that comes in through super chats. If you give a super chat, it'll be in the question. I would suggest you send them as you think of something in the debate. That would be the time to do that. All right, so you'll see that pinned in there. Rules of engagement are there. I've got moderators keeping track of that as well. All right, Jonathan, I believe you are going first. I'm going to pull the rest of us off stage. I'm going to bring up your notes, and then your time will start as soon as you say your first word, and I will get your timer going. Sound good?
Okay, so straight away he's going to Romulus. Now, as I mentioned, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to explain who some of these people are. And we're just going to pull up some basic, bog standard, Wikipedia type of articles and just say, okay, who was Romulus? And just read the first little bit. Because what I find is if someone is listening to this or watching this and they have no idea who Romulus is, in a debate like this, it's just considered that everyone would know who Romulus is, and so it's not explained. And I've listened to I think pretty much every one of Jonathan Sheffield's debates, and some of them I've listened to over and over and over because I really wanted to get into his headspace. And at times I'm like, actually, I don't even know who that person is. And so I'll go and look it up, think about it, and go and read what they've said. And this is really handy too with ChatGPT. ChatGPT is very good for this type of debate. You can just grab the transcript, throw it into ChatGPT and say, can you summarize this for me? Can you explain who all the characters are? And it'll explain it. But what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll read the slides as well. I did this with the James White, Thomas Ross debate, and this helped a lot because one of James White's main objections to Thomas Ross was that he had way too much information, way too many slides, and that was a problem, and he didn't respect his audience apparently. But Thomas Ross did that so that audiences later on who watched the video could fact check everything. He just had everything referenced. So sometimes he would have a whole screen of just text, but he would highlight something in the middle and just read that. He's not going to read through the whole thing, but it's so that people later can read through and go, oh, that was Bruce Metzger, or that was whoever. And so we're going to stop, look at these slides, and we're going to read through them all. And hopefully that people can be on board with that type of presentation. So it says here, Romulus, dying and rising figures in the ancient world, falsified and explained away in a naturalistic manner. And so let's just quickly look up who Romulus is. Okay, so I've got Plutarch up here. Let's jump out of that and we'll go to search Romulus. Romulus was the legendary founder and first king of Rome. Various traditions attribute the establishment of many of Rome's oldest legal, political, and religious social institutions to Romulus and his contemporaries. Although many of these traditions incorporate elements of folklore, and it is not clear to what extent a historical figure underlies the mythical Romulus, the events and institutions ascribed to him were central to the myths surrounding Rome's origins and cultural traditions. So some people might know this here. It has the she-wolf and the twins getting the milk. And so one of these is Romulus. And so that's where you get the word Rome. And so it's very interesting to go through the etymology of some of these words, because we have Rome affects us today with the city of Rome, but also in linguistics, we know that we have Romance languages, which are all related to Rome. And so they all are basically etymologically linked to Romulus, the founder and first king of Rome. So very interesting. And let's see when he lived. Let's just check that out. Okay. Primary sources, historicity, tomb of Romulus. Maybe if I type in born. Okay, his reign was 753 to 716 BC. So we're looking around the time that Isaiah wrote the book of Isaiah. If you're, a Textus Receptus guy, confessional bibliology guy, ecclesiastical text type of guy, you would know that those dates add up. If you're skeptical, you will think Isaiah was written in, I think it's like 300 or 400 or something like that. But 753 to 716, so around that time that Isaiah was writing his book. And so Romulus that's the traditional date he was ruling over Rome. So let's go on with this.
In the works of the Greek biographer Plutarch and the Roman...
Okay, so the Greek biographer Plutarch, so that was the one that I had up here, Plutarch. So he did biographies, and he was born before 50 AD and died sometime after AD 120. And so very interesting. And he did biographies. So we're looking at a biography. If he's done Romulus, it's quite a long way away. But that's just the way that most ancient works are like that. They're 500, 600, 700, 800 years detached from the events. That's why when we look at the Gospels, many people will push things back to 2nd century or whatever, which I think they were definitely 1st century. But they push it back to 2nd century, but it's still really, really good. But that people know by pushing it back to 2nd century, it sort of destroys the whole narrative that the church used those scriptures and all the rest of it. But let's continue. So Plutarch is a biographer. That's him with his funny nose. Maybe there's a nicer picture of the poor guy. There probably isn't. So let's just continue.
Historian Livy. We find the story of the...
Okay, so historian Livy, or Levy. Let's check that guy out. Now, obviously, as we go through this, Romulus, Livy, Plutarch, these names will just be mentioned all over the place, but at least now you'll be able to picture who these guys are. Livy, Roman historian from 59 BC to 17 AD. So around about the same time. So he's writing this around about the birth of Christ. He was a Roman historian. He wrote a monumental history of Rome and the Roman people. Okay, so very interesting. He wrote from the founding of the city, covering the period of the earliest legends of Rome before the traditional founding in 753 BC through the reign of Augustus in Livy's own lifetime. So very interesting guy there. So that's Livy.
The legendary founder and first king of Rome, Romulus. Allegedly, Romulus was convening an assembly outside the city when a sudden and violent thunderstorm erupted. The storm surrounded the king in such a dense cloud that he became completely invisible to the assembly. From that hour, Romulus was no longer seen on earth. As the storm ceased and the sun broke out, the crowd assembled only to find the throne deserted, prompting an inquiry about their king. The senators who had been standing close to Romulus did not allow the assembly to investigate or concern itself with the matter. Instead, they ordered them to honor and worship Romulus as a god, citing that a whirlwind had carried him up to heaven. After a few took the initiative, many declared Romulus a god, the son of a god and father of Rome. However, some questioned the matter with a bitter and hostile spirit, accusing the senators of opposing a silly tale on the people and of being the murderers of the kings themselves.
Okay, so I'll just stop it there and I'll just go through this slide because these slides are obviously put there for people like us who are studying into this material so that we know more about it. So it has dying and rising figures in the ancient world, falsified and explained away in a naturalistic manner. So here we have Livy on Romulus. So he talks about, I might make that full, oh no, I can't make it full screen. He talks about a violent thunderstorm suddenly arose and enveloped the king in so dense a cloud that he was quite invisible to the assembly. From that hour, Romulus was no longer seen on earth. And then it says down here, I believe, however, that that even then there were some who secretly hinted that he, Romulus, had been torn limb from limb by the senators. A tradition to this effect, though certainly a very dim one, has filtered down to us. And so that's Livy on Romulus. So, this was Livy, the biographer, this guy here, around about the time of Jesus. He's writing the history of Rome. And then we have Plutarch, the guy we looked at earlier, and he says, but the nobles gathered closely together, and when the storm had ceased and the sun shone out, And the multitude, now gathered together again in the same place as before, anxiously sought for their king. The nobles would not suffer them to inquire into his disappearance, nor busy themselves about it, but exhorted them all to honor and revere Romulus, since he had been caught up into heaven and was to be a benevolent, it's really hard to read this, it's a little bit blurry, God for them instead of a good king. The multitude, accordingly believed this, and rejoicing in it went away to worship with the good hopes of his favor. But there were some, it is said, who tested the matter in a bitter and hostile spirit, and confounded the patricians with the accusation of imposing a silly tale upon the people of being themselves the murderers of the king. So very interesting there. So that's Plutarch and what he says about the situation. So let's continue on to the next part.
Of opposing a silly tale on the people and of being the murderers of the kings themselves. Thereafter, a patrician even asserted before the Roman Senate that he encountered the ascended Romulus, who descended from the sky and approached him, stating, "Go and inform the Romans that it is the will of heaven that my Rome shall be capital of the world." After uttering these words, Romulus departed upward.
Okay, so I'll just read through that slide. Dying and rising figures in the ancient world, falsified and explained away in a naturalistic manner. So Jonathan hasn't really explained what this is. I guess this is perhaps a book. I'm not sure if it's an article that Jonathan himself has written, or if this is just a book that he's using for his presentation. So it says here, he, Proculus Julius, therefore appeared before the assembly and reported that at the dawn of that very day, the father of this city, that is Romulus, suddenly descended from heaven and appeared to me, while I stood transfixed before him in deepest reverence, praying that I might be pardoned for gazing upon him. He addressed me as follows: "Go, tell the Romans that it is the will of heaven that my city of Rome should be the head of all the world. Let them henceforth cultivate the arts of war. Let them know for certain that no human might can withstand the arms of Rome, and let them hand down this knowledge to posterity." So this is Livy, The History of Rome, Book 1, 16 to 7, maybe 17. Okay, so let's continue.
Of the world. After uttering these words, Romulus departed upward. However, according to Cicero, Livy, and Plutarch, the account was fabricated by the patrician to exonerate the senators and to alleviate public mourning.
Now, I'm just going to rewind it there because he did mention 3 people.
Cicero, Livy.
Cicero, okay. So some people might go, who is Cicero? Let's check him out. So we're looking at Livy here. Cicero, Marcus Tullius Cicero, 3rd of January 106 BC to 2nd of December 43 BC, was a Roman statesman, lawyer, scholar, philosopher, orator, writer, and academic skeptic who tried to uphold optimate principles during the political crisis that led to the establishment of the Roman Empire. And so obviously he's written about the history of Rome as well. And so this is Cicero, nice looking guy there. It's pretty cool how they've preserved these heads for us. And so, yeah, he is about, 50 years before Jesus is when he died. And so he was talking about these issues as well. So just so you know who Cicero is, because you might go, who is Cicero? Let's continue on.
And Plutarch, the account was fabricated by the patrician to exonerate the senators and to alleviate public mourning. Plutarch even likes this account.
Okay, so I'll just read through this. The generally accepted belief in the apotheosis of Romulus was strengthened by one man's clever device. The tradition runs that a man called Proculus Julius, whose authority had weight in matters of even the gravest importance, saw how deeply the community felt the loss of the king and how incensed they were against the senators suspected of having killed him. It is marvelous what credit was given to this man's story and how the grief of the people and the army was soothed by the belief that it created in the immortality of Romulus. So that's amazing, isn't it? They've killed him and then they've gone, he's ascended to heaven and I saw him. And then they're like, oh, that's good. We're happy with that story. The Romans, that was Livy, and so this is Plutarch. The Romans believed this testimony because of Proculus. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but reputation and the oath that he had taken. Furthermore, divine inspiration shaped their emotions so that no one contradicted Proculus. Instead, they all put aside suspicion and calumny, prayed to Quirinius and honored him as a god. So that was the life of Romulus, Plutarch. And this is Cicero on the Republic. We are told that this Proculus, at the instigation of the senators who wanted to free themselves from all suspicion in regard to Romulus's death, stated before a public assembly that he had seen Romulus, and that is in the book on the Republic. Now, what I might try to do is I might see if I can make this a little bit better quality. No, 720 seems the limit. So it's on auto. That's fine. I can still read through it. It's a few little things that I have to look at. I'll just catch up on some of these comments. Hilly says, where's Remus? Alfred Omega says, I know of Romulus and Pollux. Castor and Pollux. Yeah, that's in the book of Acts. I totally makes two things up there. Supposed to be Romulus and Remus and Castor and Pollux. Okay. Alfred Omega says, I have a major headache and feel like I'm on a boat right now, having something wrong with my brain. I can't think straight sometimes. Hilly says, sorry to hear that. I pray God's mercy on you. Alfred Omega says, it's all right. God's showing me the upside to it. If I'm so messed up and I still have all this stuff that he gives me that comes out, then it just proves extra to me that it ain't me. Okay. Nick, did you know I was born in Rome? I didn't know that. Rome, Georgia. Okay. Interesting. Blessings to the chat. Hello, Nick and everyone. Everyone's saying hello. Everyday man of God is in the house. Bold says, oh, I'm late, but not too much, I hope. Hi, Nick, Hilly, James Sheffield, Everyday Man of God Ministries, Alfred Omega, Peter Fig, and Hilly's got to get up at 3:30. He's an early bird. That's why he's got worms. Hilly said, I'm used to it, but tomorrow, due to the time change, it will effectively be 2:30. Have you guys got daylight savings there at the moment? Sometimes daylight savings, when I'm doing a debate, I remember one time, I was invited to a group thing, and it was a whole bunch of guys from the US, so they couldn't amend their time to, let the poor Aussie guy come in at a reasonable time. So I think I had to get up at like 4 o'clock or something. And I was struggling to sleep, and I was looking at my phone and going, man, look at the time. And the daylight savings thing didn't hit till like 3 o'clock in the morning. So I was looking at the time and then went back to sleep. And then I was looking at the time again, and it had all gone back an hour. I'd slept for an hour and didn't know it. I was like, oh, I've only slept for 15 minutes, but it was an hour and 15 minutes. Anyway, long story short, I ended up tuning into it halfway through. It looked really messy, but it was this daylight savings thing. And sometimes it makes me wonder whether the daylight saving thing's worth it. For some farmers, they get to do their thing, because sometimes it can be, quite light and quite dark. But I think they're just messing around with a lot of things. I think they should just leave it as it is. But especially if you live on a border. I mean, just yesterday, I went over to Queensland, and there we have to wind your clock back. And so if I leave here at 10 o'clock, it's 9 o'clock there. And so it just confuses me. And people who live on the border, that they do shopping in a different time zone, they pick up their kids in a different time zone, and it's like it can do their head in. You're constantly thinking about this. Hilly says, okay, I've convinced me. I better go reset the clocks and sleep. Time change tonight. Yeah, it's interesting when you get caught by your society and you get punished for something that you weren't aware of. But let's continue. So we've talked about Livy, we've talked about Cicero, we've talked about Plutarch, and they are all talking about Romulus. And so let's continue with Jonathan Sheffield.
To alleviate public mourning.
I'll just rewind it a little bit.
However, according to Cicero, Livy, and Plutarch, the account was fabricated by the patrician to exonerate the senators and to alleviate public mourning. Plutarch even likes this account to the Greek fables about Aristeas, a figure also recorded by Herodotus, who allegedly appeared after his death and made...
Okay, so he's mentioned Herodotus, so I'll quickly get that up. And so Herodotus is an ancient Greek historian, and he was born 484 BC. So for those who are biblically minded, this is around the time, just I guess at the end of the book of Daniel, around that sort of time. And it is just a passing mention, but it says Herodotus was a Greek historian and geographer from the city of that really long name that I won't mention. Now Bodrum, Turkey, under Persian control in the 5th century, and a later citizen of Thurii in modern Calabria, Italy. So there he is. Check out his face and his nose. A lot of these noses have been smashed. Some of these have been smashed on purpose. But yeah, interesting. So that's Herodotus. So he gets a mention. And I will read through this slide in a minute, but I'll just rewind it a tiny bit and we'll continue.
A figure also recorded by Herodotus' account to the Greek fables about Aristeas, a figure also recorded by Herodotus, who allegedly appeared after his death and made remarkable appearances. Accordingly, Aristeas entered a fuller's shop and died there. The fuller then closed the shop and informed his kinsman. Word spread that Aristeas has died, but some travelers denied this, claiming that they had met him on his way to Croton that very same day. Meanwhile, the relatives of the deceased went into the fuller's shop. However, when the shop was open, Aristeas was not there, dead or alive. 7 years later, he allegedly appeared briefly before vanishing.
Okay, so so this story is very similar to Aristeas. Okay, so let's check out who he was, because he's getting a mention here. Aristeas. That's interesting. The letter of Aristeas is the one that people use to say that the Septuagint is written by 72 people. So Aristeas, Greek, was a semi-legendary Greek poet and miracle worker, a native of Conesius of Asia Minor, active around the 7th century BC. The Sluder claims whenever he wished, his soul could leave his body and return again. Okay, so he was a bit of a mystic type of guy. I'm just wondering if that's the same one. I think it is. Or maybe there's, here we go. No, he's a Greek poet. Here we go. Now I've got to get the right Aristeas here. Okay, so Proconnesos. Maybe it was him, but we'll find out. Aristeas of Proconnesos. I think it was that poet. Okay, yeah, it does say he was a native of Proconnesos in Asia Minor. So 240 years after his death, Aristeas is said to have appeared in southern Italy to command that a statue of himself be set up and a new altar dedicated to Apollo, saying that since his death he had been traveling with Apollo in the form of a sacred raven. In popular culture, anyway, that is an interesting guy because it doesn't say much about him really. It's like just sort of like he's a mythical sort of guy. But anyway, maybe Jonathan Sheffield shed some light on him. But yeah, I don't think he was the one with the letter of Aristeas. So sorry for getting those two mixed up there. So this is the dying and rising figures of the ancient world, falsified and explained away in a naturalistic manner. So Plutarch on Aristeas says, now this is like the fables which the Greeks tell about Aristeas of Proconnesus and Cleomedes of Astrapalia. Love those strange names. For they say that Aristeas died in a fuller's shop, and that when his friends came to fetch away his body, it had vanished out of sight, and presently certain travelers returning from abroad said they had met Aristeas journeying towards Proton. So that's the life of Romulus. So they're saying this is very similar to what happened to this guy. He was probably murdered, and they just got rid of the body, and then they're like, well, he's in heaven, you know, he appeared to us, and this type of thing. Herodotus on Aristeas says, I would tell also the tale which I heard about him in Proconnesus and Cyzicus. They say that Aristeas, who was in birth inferior to none of the citizens, entered into a fuller's shop in Proconnesus and there died, and the fuller closed his workshop and went away to report the matter to those who were related to the dead man. And when the news had been spread abroad about the city that Aristeas was dead, a man of Cyzicus, who had come from the town of Artaci, entered into controversy with those who said so, and declared that he had met him going towards Cyzicus and had spoken with him. And while he was vehement in dispute, those who were related to the dead man came to the fuller's shop with the things proper in order to take up the corpse for burial. And when the house was opened, Aristeas was not found there, either dead or alive. In the 7th year after this, he appeared at Prokinesis and composed those verses, which are now called by the Hellenists the Arimaspera. And having composed them, he disappeared the second time. Very interesting. And I was looking up the word Elene, which is, we use that word for Greeks. And it's actually, Elene was like a god. It's very interesting to look into the etymology of that as well. But so, so sorry about the jumpy way I'm reading that. It is hard to read that on the screen there at 7:20. But let's just continue. Jonathan does explain this anyway, so I'm probably giving you too much information. But that way, at least when we get through Jonathan's presentation, we definitely know exactly who he's talking about.
7 years later, he allegedly appeared briefly before vanishing. The insights gained from these narratives brings me to my first point in the debate. The ancient world was undoubtedly familiar with the works of Herodotus, Livy, and Plutarch, let alone Bel and the Dragon and Lucian's The False Prophet.
Okay, so two we haven't looked at, Bel and the Dragon and Lucian. Okay, so let's just type in Bel and the Dragon. Yeah, that's going to be interesting. Okay, so maybe what I'll do is I'll read through these, and then when I get to Bel and the Dragon, we'll explain that. So he's making his first point here. First point, knowledge in the ancient world about how similar supernatural claims to those of Jesus could be easily explained away in a naturalistic manner. So this is one of the things people say, well, there's resurrection accounts all over the Roman world and Greek world and all this sort of stuff. But when you look closely at them, they're pretty lousy. Herodotus in Greek, he wrote about Aristaeus, allegedly appeared after his death and made remarkable appearances after dying at a fuller's shop. Naturalistic explanation: never died, presumably had a heart attack, was spotted the same day by a group of travelers who denied Aristaeus had died. Okay, so interesting. And so that's where some people would read into, there's resurrection appearances and all this sort of stuff. Then there's Livy, Roman, and it says a Romulus carried up to heaven via a whirlwind and attained the status of a god, was seen after his ascension by an influential patrician. The naturalistic explanation is senators murdered Romulus, tearing him limb from limb. The patrician Proculus Iulius fabricated the account to exonerate the senators and alleviate the public. So it's sort of well known that he was murdered, and they just said, look, he's gone up to heaven. Be happy about that. Plutarch, Greek, Romulus carried up to heaven via a whirlwind and attained the status of a god, was seen after his ascension by an influential patrician. Naturalistic explanation: senators imposed a silly tale on the people and were accused of murdering Romulus. The patrician Proculus Julius fabricated the account to exonerate the senators and alleviate the public. And so you can see that that's most probably what happened. Bel and the Dragon, Jewish. Babylonian god Marduk eats the sacrificial offerings on a nightly basis. Babylonian dragon Tiamat naturalistic explanation, Daniel exposes how pagan priests deceive followers using hidden entrances to steal offerings, thereby showing the immortal foundation of such worship. Daniel kills a serpent worshipped as a god by feeding it noxious concoction. And so it's an interesting thing that why that is there. And I guess maybe Jonathan actually just hasn't explained it yet. So I'll just read through this Bell and the Dragon one and the Lucian one, and then hopefully that sort of comes to light. It might be more information than we sort of need, sort of thing, but I'll go through this. So Lucian, Syrian, Alexander of Abono Tochicus. What a name of a place. The 2nd century Greek mystic who established a popular cult around a snake god named Glykon in the Roman Empire. The naturalistic explanation of this, he used tricks, fake oracles, and a puppet snake to swindle followers, famously exposed by the satirist Lucian. Okay, so I guess what we're looking at there is, there are some things in like Bell and the Dragon. He eats this sacrificial offerings on a nightly basis, but then when you look at it, it's probably there's a naturalistic explanation for that. For Lucian, you're talking about this guy who had this snake cult. There's a naturalistic explanation for that as well, and so I think that's the main point that he's getting at. I guess we have people like David Copperfield. I remember as a kid, they would put like a sheet over the Great Wall of China, and he would be at one end trying to squeeze his way through, and then his face would pop out through the sheet, sort of thing. And or who was that other guy, Chris Angel, and he'd jump in the wood chipper, and and something would go wrong, and they just splat blood all in the back of the wood chipper, and everyone would think he died, and then he'd turn up, this type of thing. And so, but people who watch that stuff over and over, they can usually tell how it's being faked. So there are naturalistic explanations for these type of things. And so I think that's what Jonathan Sheffield is getting at here, that in a lot of these things, you can sort of see how people can be tricked. Some people think the WWE wrestling is real. Some people think the political parties in America are real. I usually say no. Who was it? Frank Zappa. He said the American politics is the entertainment wing for the military-industrial complex. It's just the entertainment. It's just something with flashy lights and the girls dancing and all this, and you're just mesmerized by it. But it's actually just the entertainment wing for the military, just to keep you busy. And so usually you can tell, you look into something long enough, you're like, hang on, this is a scam, So I think that's what Jonathan's sort of getting at. I'll read through some of these comments and we'll continue. Sally DeBoard says, why is this even a debate? If the Holy Spirit is living in you, you already know. If he's not, you aren't saved. Yes, and that's what I said at the beginning. I said, this is not something that I've always seen these type of debates from when I was first saved as unnecessary, because it's like, well, the Bible says it, and when you know God, when you're being translated out of darkness into his light by the power of the resurrection, you're like, of course God's real. He's done this and he's done that. And, you just know that God's real. And so, of course, things that are said about God, you just go, yeah, that's 100%. Like I'm convinced 100%. And so, but there are people who are persuaded by the argumentation of Gnostics, skeptics, and atheists. And so this type of thing is actually very helpful, because what it does, it's going through their argumentation and saying, okay, you're saying all these resurrection appearances happened. Let's examine that. Let's examine, apparently there are all these other messiahs around dying on crosses everywhere. And if you watch something really simplistic like Zeitgeist, I remember the first time I watched that, I was like, this is so ridiculous. But back then, the atheist community were like, you've got to watch Zeitgeist. So I watched it, and I had this one guy confront me, and he was talking about the Son of God. You know, it's the Son of God and the sun in the sky. Can't you tell they're related? And I said, well, the word in Hebrew is ben, and sun, like in Greek, is weos or helios. Like that, it's not sun and sun like in English. And he sort of realized, yeah, that's right. English is only like after the 6th century or something, and he just went, yeah, and he just sort of didn't want to deal with it because he realized how silly it was. And he's a smart guy. He just watched this thing and he didn't give it much thought. He was just easily convinced, and then he was spewing forward this stuff on me. And but a lot of this argumentation is easily debunked. But what it does is when you've met someone who has this type of argumentation, and you can offer an answer to them, sometimes that could be the stronghold that's in their mind that you've cast down. And then they're ready to deal with the next one, and that gets cast down, and the next one, and then eventually they have no more arguments against the Word of God. And that's one of the things that we do on this channel is we go through, contradictions in the Bible. Like I was watching the Daniel McClellan recent video that he did on Judas. So I've recently done one on Judas, like I did a whole program, and he did one, and really it just comes down to him going, I think they're different stories. And it's like it's the same story in Matthew and in Acts. But they complement each other. There's no contradiction there. But they just double down. This is the problem with these guys. Sometimes you show them all the facts, but they double down. But that's what we want to show people, that's what they're doing. They're just doubling down. And so even though Jonathan Sheffield will show all this information, some people will watch through this and just go, yeah, I'm just going to repeat this narrative again and again. It's because they're not interested in truth or really representing things accurately. And there are some people out there like that. Some people they do want the truth. So yeah, I understand Sally DeBoard that sometimes you think, why is this necessary? But we need to have an answer for everyone. And just as much as someone would say, why is this word translated this way in the Bible, and we should really explain it. We know what it means. We're not struggling with that. But other people who are not yet in the kingdom of God can struggle with it. Or some people who are transitioning from growing up in a church, and they're like, do I continue living as a Christian or not? And some people have had bad experiences in churches, and they're looking for excuses to sort of get out of the Christian thing. But then when they look at all the details, they're like, actually, there really is no excuse. And that can cause them to go, no, I'm going to full on dedicate my life to Jesus. Everyday Man of God Ministries says, sorry, stepped away. Alpha and Omega says, I bounce ice cream called the Bible Guy Show, thinking it was a Christian channel, and it's a bloody atheist. Alpha and Omega says, I left your live stream just for a little bit to look at this stream called the Bible Guy Show, thinking it's a Christian channel, and it's an atheist. Yeah, there's plenty of those. I asked in the chat, is this Christian channel? And they see my title, I guess. They just all the atheists, and they start jumping on me. I find I jump straight into all the atheist groups and listen to what they're talking about and go, no, hang on, that's not correct. This is correct. And no one deals with what I'm saying. They just pretend I'm not there. They'll follow dumb, people just in the chat just saying anything like, Jesus is a lizard monster, and they'll put it up on the screen. But my one is usually well thought out. I've thought about it for years, and it's condensed in a little saying, and I put it up there, and they don't want to deal with it. And it's like, are you really interested in these things? Caps Tube. I still fail to see where any sacrifice was made. So I guess maybe you're talking about these other guys who have died, and risen again. Yeah, where's the sacrifice? Either way, there really isn't, is there? Andy says, I read in the gospel, and at the end, yes, Yeshua came back. Yep, Jesus rose from the dead. So let's continue with this.
Which establishes knowledge in the ancient world about how similar supernatural claims to those of Jesus, such as Romulus, Aristeas, Bel, and the snake god Glycon, could be easily explained away by the historians in a naturalistic manner. Accordingly, miracles...
Okay, so that's interesting. Historians, they look at these type of things and go, well, this is how we're explaining it, because someone's got a snake, they've got a snake cult, perhaps it's like could be a puppet or something like that. So people, they have a reputation for having a natural explanation for something that is fantastical. Okay, something that's wild, something that's supernatural, a supernatural claim, and people are there saying, look, this is what we really think happened. So historians, they have this tendency to do that. Okay, so that's his first point that he's making. So hopefully that's helping as we're going along. We've gone for an hour and 13 minutes so far. We're going to keep going. Alpha and Omega says, Nikon sounds like some weight loss fad pill. Okay. Caps Tube, I mean, what was the sacrifice that Jesus made? His death was tame compared to most ancient execution and torture methods. Then he came back 3 days later. I would say crucifixion was pretty wild, and probably one of the worst ways to die, especially you've been whipped and bashed and tortured earlier that day, and sleep deprivation. He didn't sleep all night. Being whipped, tortured all the way to Golgotha, and then put on a cross where you basically drown in your own blood. I don't think that's a pleasurable way to die. That's just the way he died. It doesn't have to be the worst way to die, but it's just the way that he was killed. So he is the sacrifice. So you're sort of saying, what was the sacrifice that Jesus made? Well, he gave up his life. His death was tame compared to most ancient execution and torture methods. So it's not like it's a competition, like, hey, I won the... but the thing is, too, having borne the sins of the world, if you're getting your tongue cut out or your hands cut off, or, however someone's torturing you, like, you are not bearing the weight of the sin of the world. And that's what actually killed Jesus. It wasn't so much the physical torture was all there, it was all real, but what actually killed Jesus was sin. Sin killed. So the wages of sin is death. He became sin for us. And so when he died on the cross, the weight of the sins of the whole entire world, the guilt, the shame, when he was dying there on the cross, he was dying for everyone, and he experienced all their guilt and shame. That's what I believe happened. And then he rose from the dead 3 days later. So Helg says, hi out there. Jonathan is a different but very good TR defender and approaches the subject from a unique perspective. He totally defeated Ehrman here. Okay, very good, Helg. Caps Tube says, most people would do exactly the same as Christian if it meant saving a billion souls. Not just Christians either. Roman guards spared Jesus from a true crucifixion death. He was lucky. Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know what you're trying to get at there. It's just sort of like, well, Jesus got off lightly or something. It's like, it's not a competition to like, oh, well, his death was, he gave this much blood fell on the ground, where this other guy, we slit his throat and this much blood fell on the ground. Jesus got off lightly. It's not about that. I don't know why this competition thing sort of would come up there. But okay, so the takeaway from the first point, miracles and claims of the supernatural can be investigated by historians and subjected to falsification regardless of one's worldview. So you don't have to be a Christian to come up with these type of conclusions. You don't have to be an atheist. Just historians, they tended to naturally go, okay, did Romulus, float up to heaven, or was he probably killed? He's probably killed, And so that's that just seems to be the way that historians would investigate these things and look at these things. Okay, so let's continue.
And claims of the supernatural can be investigated by historians and subjected to falsification. Although the general populace tended to be credulous, the educated elite was not, as they were well.
Okay, so I'll read through these. The educated elite of the ancient world were not stupid. Cicero said, even in Greece, they worship a number of deified mortals. And with our own people, Romulus and many others who were believed to have been admitted to celestial citizenship in recent times by a sort of extension of the franchise, well, those are the superstitions of the unlearned. And so this is his book on the gods, 339. And Plutarch says, in short, many such fables were told by writers who improbably ascribe divinity to the mortal features in human nature, as well as to the divine life of Romulus, 28:4.
Popular by historians and subjected to falsification. Although the general populace tended to be credulous, the educated elite was not, as they were well versed in pre-Socratic philosophy, which transitioned from mythological explanations to rational, naturalistic, and law-like explanations of the physical universe.
Okay, so pre-Socratics laying the groundwork for the law of physics. Rational explanations, the pre-Socratics generally sought internal naturalistic causes for physical phenomena rather than attributing events to the actions of gods. So then we have the Logos. Now, some of this is so blurry, it's very hard to read. And I'm just wondering if I should just go through all that or just read the headings. And so, but I think you get the gist. And so they were laying down the laws of physics, of rationality. We have the Logos, which is sort of like reason, the rejection of void, Thales, Anaximenes, conversation, the Pythagoreans, and Tommyism. So there's a bit of homework for us, I guess, but I don't want to go through and read this. It's blurry and it's already complicated. And so, but I will just say that we really need to look at Socrates. And just so people know too, there is a really cool YouTube channel that I've gotten into recently, and it's called The People's Profile. And sometimes they'll go through like who is the Ayatollah Khomeini, this type of thing, or who was Winston Churchill, or who was Martin Luther. They just have this type of thing. And so I'll just give them a bit of a plug. People's Profile. And so this is it here. Russia's field marshal, Netanyahu, leader of Israel, the new Mao, Ford, the last fascist, Franco, Khomeini biography, Nazi addict. So they got lots of different people. And Is there bias? Yeah, well, there's bias in everything. And so, but I think it gives you a good general understanding, and it's actually really easy to listen to. I'm not sure if it's all AI, but yeah, Henry the Seventh, that's interesting, and Henry the Eighth. So that's very interesting. The Tudors, going through that. So I went through this one the other day, the new Mao. And so Xi Jinping, very interesting life story, and it just gives you just general knowledge. And so I just sort of give that a bit of a plug. Okay, so we're looking at Socrates. So from about 470 to 399 BC, was an ancient Greek philosopher from classical Athens, perhaps the first Western moral philosopher, and a major inspiration on his student Plato, who largely founded the tradition of Western philosophy. So here is Socrates here with his smashed in nose, and here's another one of him. And so, yeah, that is Socrates. So the pre-Socratics, they laid the groundwork for the laws of physics. People were looking at things rationally. They were discounting the supernatural, saying that we need to look at things in a rational way, and we need to get rid of that type of superstitious, supernatural type of thing, or we need to have alternatives to that. And so that's where I feel Jonathan's going with this. But let's just rewind it a little bit. And this just popped up as, for like 5 seconds sort of thing. So I think if he really wanted to stay there, he would have. But you can go to the video yourself and take a screenshot of that. Actually, maybe if this is on Facts or Jonathan Sheffield. So this is on Jonathan Sheffield's one. Maybe the one on Facts is clearer, because I'll just have a quick look. Facts. Okay, and no, same quality. Okay, that's cool. So it's the same quality, so it won't really matter. I thought it might have been maybe some people are doing stuff in 4K often, and you would be able to read that from here, sort of thing. But it is difficult. But let's just continue.
To rational credulity and subjected to falsification. Although the general populace tended to be credulous, the educated elite was not, as they were well versed in pre-Socratic philosophy, which transitioned from mythological explanations to rational, naturalistic, and law-like explanations of the physical universe. Furthermore, Plutarch devoted considerable efforts to providing naturalistic explanations for the widespread cultural phenomenon in antiquity, in which mortal beings vanish bodily, ascend to the heavens, and become gods. While Plutarch attempts to provide counter-narratives to the resurrection accounts of Romulus, Aristeas, and others hundreds of years after the so-called events, the one name curiously absent from his record is Jesus, which leads to my second point. If the resurrection of Jesus was merely a hoax.
Okay, so let's just look at this slide. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Plutarch attempts to provide counter-narratives to the resurrection accounts of Romulus, Aristeas, Cleomedes, and Al-Cumne. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but let's go to... We're just going to look up those last two ones because we don't want to just read a name and not understand who they are. Here we go. Cleomedes was a Greek astronomer who is known chiefly for his book on circular motions and celestial bodies, also known as the heavens. And so his birth date is not known. Some people say mid-1st century and 400, so between those times. So yeah, roughly around the time of, so the Book of Acts all the way through up to the year 400 AD. And so, yeah, interesting. And we don't have a picture of the guy or a bust or anything like that. So we will move on to the next one, which is Alcmene. Alcmene. Okay. In Greek mythology, Alcmene, or Alcmena, was the wife of Amphitryon. They bore 2 children, and so this is mythology. Okay. Got to learn my Greek mythology. So Plutarch attempts to provide counter narratives to the resurrection accounts of Romulus, Aristaeus, and it looks like Cleomedes and Alcmene have resurrection accounts as well. So, but these guys seem to be just complete myths. Maybe I can type in resurrection. Can't see resurrection. So it has death. Okay. So many times in Greek mythology, they become something else. So I'm not sure exactly what happened here without going through the whole thing, which I don't really want to do just because it's just a passing name. But I'll quickly go back to Cleomedes. And we'll look for a resurrection. No. Maybe Rose. No. And perhaps because he's talking about a whole bunch of different things, maybe he talked about people who have claimed to have resurrected. Anyway, I will leave that one because I'm not really getting any advancement there. Let's just continue on.
Which leads to my second point. If the resurrection of Jesus was merely a hoax orchestrated by the Galileans, it appears strange, given the numerous challenges from those in the best position to inspect the evidence, that there isn't a single credible record or tome from the Roman Empire, Sanhedrin, Herods, or the educated classes of Jews, Greeks, or Syrians offering a naturalistic explanation for the events that transpired in Judea. The silence of a credible...
Okay, so that's very interesting. So the second point of the debate is there isn't a single credible record or tome from the Roman Empire, Sanhedrin, Herods, or the educated classes of Jews, Greeks, or Syrians of a naturalistic explanation for Jesus and the resurrection. So here's all these other people with fanciful, gods and, some of these people, whether you're Romulus, whether some of these people existed or not, they've died and apparently resurrected and been seen to people. But historians are pulling those things to bits and saying, look, we've got a naturalistic explanation for what really happened there. But when it comes to Jesus, there is, and I think it comes up in his next slide here, the dog that did not bark. And so the whole thing of there is people who are usually pointing out problems, they're not pointing out problems with the resurrection of Christ. So I think this is a very strong point that gets made. And so some of these comments, Wagsman says there have been thousands of Elvis sightings since the late 1970s. Therefore, Elvis was raised from the dead. Okay, that's compelling. There have been thousands. Okay, so it got repeated there. Caps Tube says, my point is that most people in this channel would accept the known fate of Jesus to even just save their children, much less the world. Okay. But Jesus, yeah, he died for the sins of the world. He's the only one who could have done that. So it's not I just don't understand why there's this competition. Like, someone else would have done that. The disciples died, some of them horrific deaths. I think it was Jeremiah was sawn in half. And so I'm just really not sure where you're coming from, because you seem to have this idea of like it's a competition. I'm just not really. And you say, I'm not really impressed by the sacrifice. Okay. Well, when you meet God face to face, which we all will, you can ask him then. Wagsman says there have been thousands of Elvis sightings. So if that sort of Elvis thing is 3 times in a row now, I might just sort of block that. Let's continue.
For the events that transpired in Judea. The silence of a credible counter-narrative to Jesus and the resurrection in the surviving records is as significant as the silence was for Sherlock Holmes in the case of the dog that did not bark, establishing in legal terms a negative fact. Thus, the absence of those expected facts provides positive evidence supporting the validity of Jesus' resurrection. Consider the following. One of the earliest polemics by the Jews against Jesus and the resurrection is recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. Justin Martyr, Tertullian.
Okay, so we'll get into that. I just want to square up, because he's made his first point and this is his second point. So I just want to square up what I've got written here. So he starts by showing that ancient historians could expose false miracle stories. And that is correct. Writers like Plutarch often give natural explanations for these legendary stories. And so why weren't historians saying this type of thing about Jesus? Because why isn't this seen by them as just another fable, just another legendary type of story? And so then we're going on to the dog that didn't bark argument. And there really is no ancient naturalistic explanation for the resurrection of Jesus. And so he's making this argument that this is why, this is a good support for the resurrection of Jesus, because there really is there's no Plutarch sort of saying, this is, there were in the Gospels, it does talk about the Sanhedrin made the story that his disciples came and stole him away, this type of thing. And so that's what he's starting to mention here. And so we're going to go through that. And he has here, I might just go back to the former slide. I'm not sure.
Consider the positive evidence.
Okay, so the dog that did not bark. The silence of a credible counter-narrative to Jesus and the resurrection in the surviving records is as significant as the silence was for Sherlock Holmes in the case of the dog that did not bark, establishing in legal terms a negative fact. Thus, the absence of those expected facts provides positive evidence for supporting the validity of Jesus's resurrection.
Supporting the validity of Jesus' resurrection. Consider the following. One of the earliest polemics by the Jews.
So hopefully he reads through this whole thing. If he doesn't, I will try and read the whole thing, even though it's a tiny bit blurry.
Jews against Jesus and the resurrection is recorded in the Gospel of Matthew. Justin Martyr, Tertullian, and the Toledoth Jesu, which accuses the disciples of being suspects in a capital crime of grave robbery, an obvious advantage their enemies would not fail to exploit. Yet in the many legal settings.
Okay, so I'll go through some of these details. The earliest polemic by the Jews against the resurrection of Jesus. So this is something that was mentioned by the Jews who had crucified Jesus. This is mentioned. This has even in Matthew it says this is commonly reported among the Jews to this day. So it says here, Matthew 28:11-15, and when they were assembled with the elders and had taken counsel, they gave large money unto the soldiers, saying, Say ye, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we slept. And if this come to the governor's ears, we will persuade him and secure you. So they took the money and did as they were taught. And this saying is commonly reported among the Jews unto this day. And so that's Matthew 28. The dialogue with Trypho 108 says, after you learned that he rose from the dead, but as I said before, you have sent, chosen, and ordained men throughout all the world to proclaim that a godless and lawless heresy had sprung from one Jesus, a Galilean deceiver, whom we crucified, but his disciples stole by night from the tomb. Tertullian's de spectac I'm not sure those letters there. This is he whom his disciples secretly stole away, that it might be said that he had risen again. Toledoth Jesu, on the first day of the week, his bold followers came to Queen Helena with the report that he who was again was truly the Messiah, and that he was not in his grave. He had ascended to heaven as he prophesied. Diligent search was made, and he was not found in the grave where he had been buried. A gardener had taken him from the grave and had brought him into the garden and buried him in the sand over which the waters flowed into the garden. The gardener related what he had done in order that Yeshu's followers should not steal the body and then claim that he had ascended into heaven. Okay, interesting. So Toledoth is the Hebrew word there for history. Okay, so let's move on from there.
Would not fail to exploit. Yet in the many legal settings and acts where the disciples are interrogated before the Jewish and Roman authorities, they are never suspected of or questioned about grave robbery.
That's a really good point. That's so good. So because these guys know what happened with Jesus. They've murdered him. They put him on a cross. They know what's happened, and they would have been the ones who gave money to the Roman soldiers, and they would have seen their facial expressions. They're saying something supernatural's happened, and so they've had to bribe them to shut their mouth. And there's a whole bunch of things that come into play there. But when they're in front of the disciples, they're not saying, "Hey, you where's the body? Or you tampered with a body." Like, it's just a rumor that started. But when it comes down to it, when they're in front of these people, they could have easily arrested them and said, "Well, you guys have tampered with a body. We're going to imprison you until you show us where the body. Where did you hide the body?" Because that's an illegal thing to do, to tamper with someone's grave, and also to go around spreading rumors about that type of thing. And so it's very interesting. Here it says, there is no credible counter-narrative to Jesus and the resurrection from the Jewish histories. No mention of grave robbery when Christians are questioned before both Jews and Romans. Acts 4, Peter and John before the Sanhedrin. Acts 5, the apostles were brought in and made to appear before the Sanhedrin to be questioned by the high priest. Acts 6-7, Stephen before the Sanhedrin. Acts 18, Paul before Galileo, the proconsul of Achaia. Those letters are all blurred together. I just said Galileo. I'm pretty sure that's what his name was. Acts 23, Paul before the Sanhedrin. Acts 23:26, Paul before the king of Galilee and the prefect of Judea,
thus undermining the theory's credibility. Lucian, in The False Prophet, exposed the naturalistic techniques Alexander used to deceive the public into endorsing the deity Glycon, despite ridicule.
Okay, so it's just a passing thing, but it says, say hello to the boys and girls, Glycon, say hello. So I think that's the guy with the fake snake, Alexander the False Prophet, or maybe it's a different one. Lucian of Samosata, Alexander the False Prophet. It says, no doubt, my dear Celsus, you think it a slight and trivial matter to bid me set down in a book and send you the history of Alexander, the impostor of Abonotestius. I should just leave those really long names alone, of that place, including all his clever schemes, bold emprises, and sleights of hand. When at length it was time to begin, he contrived an ingenious ruse, going at night to the foundations of the temple, which were just being excavated, where a pool of water had gathered, which either issued from springs somewhere in the foundations themselves or had fallen from the sky. He accreted there a goose egg, previously blown, which contained a snake just born, and after burying it deep in mud. As a matter of fact, this trick to a man like you, and if it is not out of place to say so, like myself, also was obvious and easy to see through, but to those driveling idiots, it was miraculous and almost as good as incredible. Having discovered various ways of doing the seals, he would read something into the question and answer them. Okay, so it's very blurry there, so I can't read the rest of it. But it seems like this guy, he had an egg, maybe an ostrich egg or something like that, I think it is, and he's putting these snakes, baby snakes in there, and then he's burying them in mud, and then he's coming out with this thing. I guess like Sai Baba type of miracles where he coughs up a rock and this type of thing. But when you have the cameras on him, you can see it's fake, you know. So Alexander the False Prophet was proven to be fake. So
in The False Prophet, exposed undermining the theory's credibility. Lucian, in The False Prophet, exposed the naturalistic techniques Alexander used to deceive the public into endorsing the deity Glycon. Despite ridiculing Christians as gullible for worshiping a crucified sage, Lucian did not produce a comparable treatise in antiquity about Jesus and the resurrection.
Okay, so it says here, there is no credible counter narrative to Jesus and the resurrection from the Syrian rhetorician. These deluded creatures, you see, have persuaded themselves that they are immortal and will live forever, which explains the contempt of death and willing self-sacrifice so common among them. It was impressed on them too by their lawgiver that from the moment they are converted, deny the gods of Greece, worship the crucified sage, and live after his laws. They are all brothers. They take his instructions completely on faith, with the result that they despise all worldly goods and hold them in common ownership. So any adroit, unscrupulous fellow who knows the world has only to get among these simple souls, and his fortune is quickly made. He plays with them. And so that's Lucian, and it's the passing of Peregrinus.
Produce a comparable treatise in antiquity about Jesus and the resurrection. Consequently, neither the Celsus, Porphyry, Julian, nor the legal authorities of the Talmud all of whom accused Jesus of engaging in the magical arts and or sorcery with the intent of defrauding the public.
Okay. And so there is no credible counter-narrative to Jesus and the resurrection from the Greek, Syrian, and Roman intellectuals. Legal authorities of the Babylonian Talmud on Jesus's sorcery. So it says here, on the eve of the Passover, Jesus was hanged for 40 days before the execution took place. A herald went forth and cried, "He is going to be stoned because he has practiced sorcery and led Israel astray." Okay, so Seleucus on Jesus' miraculous powers. Jesus, having been brought up in obscurity, went as a hired laborer to Egypt, and having there acquired some miraculous powers, returned home, and on the strength of them gave himself out to be a god. That is Celsus quoted in Origen's Contra Celsum. The Roman Emperor Julian on Jesus's powers says Jesus has now been honored for about 300 years, having done nothing throughout his lifetime that was worthy of fame, unless anyone thinks it is a great work to heal the lame and the blind and cast out demons in the towns of Bethsaida and Bethany. So that's against the Galileans book I excerpted from Cyril of Alexandria. Porphyry on Jesus's magical arts. He did it all for money. They were poor and country-dwelling men, seeing they used to have nothing. Certain wonders were worked with magical arts. Not that it was unusual, however, to do wonders, for the magicians in Egypt also did wonders against Moses. Apollonius also did them. Apuleius also did them, and a number have done wonders. They did wonders by magical arts so that they might receive riches from rich and impressionable women whom they had led astray. Porphyry against the Christian fragments, the Tertullian project. And Ben Yeshurun says, 1 Kings 17:22, and the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child came into him, and he revived. Very good scripture.
The magical arts and or sorcery with the intent of defrauding the public. It is also noteworthy that Tacitus, Pliny, and Suetonius, who specifically reference what they regarded as a destructive superstition among the Christians, statements consistent with the resurrection of Jesus, did not produce a historiography that falsified the resurrection.
Okay, so Pliny on the Christian superstition. So I might just quickly get some of these names up. I think I forgot to do that a little bit earlier, but Pliny the Elder. Some people call him Pliny. I prefer Pliny. I don't know why. Here he is, handsome guy. It's a 19th century portrait. So born 23 or 24, so just before Jesus was crucified, and he died around 79. Okay, very interesting. He was known as Pliny the Elder, was a Roman author, naturalist, scientist, naval and army commander of the early Roman Empire, procurator and friend of Emperor Vespasian. Pliny wrote the Encyclopedic Naturalis Historia, natural history. So he is a historian talking a lot about certain things and talking a lot about Christianity and Christians, because that's what happened during his lifetime. So I just thought I'd mention who Pliny is, or Pliny, some people call him. Tacitus, let's have a quick look. He was a Roman historian from about the year 56 to about 120. historian and politician. He is widely regarded as one of the greatest Roman historians by modern scholars. So he has two major works. Here he is here looking all handsome outside the Austrian Parliament building. And so I'll just sort of give you a bit of a insight into who he was, because otherwise it's like, who said that? Who cares? Well, it's these people. And this guy, who I've actually never heard of, unless it's spelt differently to how it sounded, Tonius, Roman historian. Suetonius, I think I have heard of him. Suetonius, okay. Roman historian who wrote during the imperial era of the Roman Empire. His most important work is De Vita Caesareum, commonly known in English as the 12 Caesars. And so, yeah, writing about that era. And so from about AD 69 to AD 122, so he would have seen a lot of growth in Christianity. And so he's the one saying this at the end. So let's look at what Pliny says. I found nothing but debased superstition carried to great lengths, so I postponed my examination and immediately consulted you. The matter seems to me worthy of your consideration, especially as there are so many people involved in the danger. Many persons of all ages, of both sexes alike, are being brought into peril of their lives by their accusers, and the process will go on, for the contagion of this superstition is spread not only through the free cities, but into the villages and the rural districts. And yet it seems to me that it can be checked and set right. So that's Pliny letters, number 10, 96 to 97. Tacitus on the Christian superstition says, people called Christians who were infamous for their abominations. The originator of the name Christ was executed as a criminal by the procurator Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius, and though repressed, this destructive superstition erupted again, not only through Judea, which was the origin of this evil, but also through the city of Rome. That's very interesting, because that's a very early witness to Pontius Pilate there. Suetonius on the Christian superstition, punishment was inflicted on the Christians, a class of men given to a new and mischievous superstition. Suetonius on the life of Nero. Okay, so I'll just rewind it a little bit and we'll continue.
The superstition among the Christians, statements consistent with the resurrection of Jesus, did not produce a historiography that falsified the resurrection. Likewise, Josephus' biographies provide insights into early Christianity and an account of Jesus' brother James. Nonetheless, no work refuting a resurrection hope, even though such a tome would have served Josephus well at the court of the Flavian emperors.
Okay, so there is no credible counter-narrative to Jesus and the resurrection from the Jewish historian Joseph of Arimathea. Josephus. Why was I thinking of Joseph of Arimathea? I was listening to a guy who was saying that at the birth of Jesus, there was a Joseph and Mary, and at the death of Jesus, there was Mary was there, but it was Joseph of the Arimathea, so there was a Joseph there, and he was sort of trying to link the two. I couldn't really see it, but I didn't listen to the whole thing. Anyway, he's been on my mind. So, Josephus, very famous author. We'll just jump in, and for those who don't know, we'll read a little bit about him. Flavius Josephus was born Yosef ben Mattiyahu, That's interesting. An interesting name. He's a popular Jewish singer. I went and saw him in LA, actually. It was interesting. It was like the place was just filled with people with like kippahs and, you know, hats and the tassels and all sorts of things, and went along and checked it out. AD 37 to 100 was a Roman Jewish historian and military leader, best known for writing the Jewish War. He was born in Jerusalem, then part of the Roman province of Judea, to a father of priestly descent and a mother who claimed Hasmonean royal ancestry. So he's a very interesting guy. Probably, if you're looking at the history of first century, second century Christianity, Josephus is the one you really need to read and study. And for apologetics, most people get into Josephus. He's the most mentioned guy that I find. Even when people are talking about last days, I talk about Josephus. People are talking about, you know, certain aspects of salvation. They'll bring up Josephus. Book of Acts, Josephus. Like constantly, Josephus is brought up. And so, regardless of whether you want to read him or not, you're going to have to deal with it if you want to have an answer for everyone. And so, just after Jesus died, and he just after the book of Revelation was penned, that's his lifespan. And so there he is right there. That's an actual picture of him. No, that's a modern rendition. But let's continue. And so these are the cartoons that I was telling you about, or the animations that Jonathan Sheffield has done. And so you can usually tell Jonathan's own work by these type of things. Now, I know he actually did the artwork, the cover intro work for Myth Vision, who they're obviously atheistic and agnostics, but he did the artwork for them as well. So it has here early Christianity reference, Antiquities 18.3.3, an account of Jesus' brother James, Antiquities 20.9. And so he's saying that there's no real counter narrative where he could have said, yeah, these silly Christians, blah, 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 you know, and had a counter narrative for the resurrection or whatever. He didn't do that, which is interesting.
Even though such a tome would have served Josephus well at the court of the Flavian emperors. Paul even argued his case regarding the resurrection of Jesus before Caesar's lieutenants, Festus and Agrippa, giving them an opportunity in their official capacity to falsify the narrative. However,
Okay. Paul, before the prefect of Judea and the king of Galilee, it says here, this is Acts chapter 26, verses 19 to 23. Therefore, King Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision, but declared first to those in Damascus and in Jerusalem and throughout all the region of Judea, and then to the Gentiles, that they should repent, turn to God, and do works befitting repentance. For these reasons, the Jews seized me in the temple and tried to kill me. Therefore, having obtained help from God, to this day I stand witnessing both to small and great, saying no other things than those which the prophets and Moses said would come, that the Christ would suffer, and that he would be first to rise from the dead, and would proclaim light to the Jewish people and to the Gentiles. So it has Anastasius written here as the Greek word for rise here. I guess he's put that there on purpose. It's interesting that all the ST words in the Indo-European languages usually have something to do with standing up or resurrecting, which is quite an interesting little factoid. And like there might be a star or something like that, or something that rises up in the morning. The sun rises up. And, so anyway, sometimes if you see ST words, sometimes they have like say first erst in the German Ersterhang, meaning to stand up, or Firsterhang, meaning resurrection, this type of thing. So it's interesting if you're studying etymology, going through and looking at ST words that deal with rising up or standing up or being first or resurrection, this type of thing.
An opportunity in their official capacity to falsify the narrative. However, no credible counter-narrative was offered in response to Paul's claims. In short, the dog that did not bark.
Okay, so there's no credible counter-narrative to Jesus and the resurrection from Caesar's lieutenants. Response from Festa, Paul, thou art beside thyself, much learning doth make thee mad. Response from Agrippa, then Agrippa said to Paul, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. So that's in Acts chapter 26, verses 24 and 26. Very interesting responses from these guys who, would have known their history. They would have known that there were people throughout the ages making fantastical claims. But then here's Paul and Agrippa saying, you're almost persuading me to become a Christian, because he knew quite a bit about the Hebrew Bible. Was it his wife was Hebrew? Anyway, very interesting.
To Paul's claims. In short, the dog that did not bark. In the absence of a credible counter-narrative to Jesus' resurrection, it is natural that the educated elite of the ancient world in its campaign against Christianity, namely Celsus, Porphyry, and Julian, would focus on undermining the credibility of the witnesses to the alleged resurrection.
So, these guys just seem like some more historians. We looked at Celsus, but Porphyry of Tyre, we haven't really looked at him, or Julian, and I don't think we really need to look all these guys up and just pretty much read that they were historians. But it says here, the educated elite of the ancient world, intellectual campaign against Christianity. Julian, Roman emperor from 361 to 363, notable philosopher and author in Greek against the Galileans. Porphyry of Tyre, Roman Phoenician Neoplatonic philosopher, wrote 15 books against the Christians. Celsus, a Greek philosopher who wrote against the Christians on the true word. Okay.
Would focus on undermining the credibility of the witnesses to the alleged resurrection. Accordingly, they argued that the post-resurrection appearances of the women at the tomb, the disciples, and their followers were likely the result of hysteria, sorcery, or grief-induced hallucinations.
Okay, so the educated elite of the ancient world, intellectual campaign against Christianity, post-resurrection appearances. So this is Celsus via Origen. But who really saw the resurrection? A historical woman, as you admit, and perhaps one other person, both deluded by his sorcery, or else so wrenched with grief as his failure that they hallucinated him rising from the dead by sort of wishful thinking. That's interesting. Apocryph 2:14 says, Jesus appeared to Mary Magdalene, a prostitute, who the Bible doesn't say that she was a prostitute, who came from some horrible little village and had been possessed by 7 demons, and another Mary, equally known, probably a peasant woman, and others who were of no account. So they're just sort of demonizing everyone involved here. But like Jonathan said, it's usually, they're into magic, or they're just hysterical, or they're hallucinating, this type of thing.
Hysteria, sorcery, or grief-induced hallucinations. Furthermore, they attack what they framed as contradictory statements in the gospel. Dr. Ehrman also shares this view.
Okay, the educated elite of the ancient world, intellectual campaign against Christianity, alleged contradictions in the Gospels. So this is Apocryph 2:12. Each of the 4 contradicts the other in writing his account of the events and of his suffering and crucifixion. Based on these contradictory and second-hand reports, one might think this describes not the suffering of a single individual, but of several. Where one says, "Into your hands I will deliver my spirit," another says, "It is finished," and another, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Or, "Why have you forsaken me?" And another, my God, why do you punish me?" It's quite interesting because that's one of the main themes that atheists and agnostics and skeptics try to come against is the univocality of the Bible, in a sense where you've got 4 gospel accounts, and instead of complementing each other, because Jesus would have said lots and lots of things. So some people are saying, well, he said this, and other people are saying, well, he also said this. But instead, it's like, no, we have to pit these books against each other, and they're actually talking about someone completely different. There's probably 2 Jesuses getting around being crucified, and one said this and the other one said that. It's quite strange. And this type of thing is still around in the skeptics. It's like they'll be dogmatic as well on this, that they're writing their own individual accounts. Well, even couldn't they have just been friends? Couldn't Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all have probably known each other? It's like, no, they had to have copied from this and added to this, and they try and get rid of univocality, so the Bible is not speaking with one voice, and it's not the voice of God speaking through it all. But also they try and get rid of Jesus by saying, well, Mark was first because it was short, and then other people just copied him, but then he just elaborated and made up a whole bunch of other stuff, so sort of gets rid of Jesus being real, and from there, then they just talk about textual variants and all the other stuff just to sort of befuddle people, because most people are completely illiterate on that topic. So this is Julian via Cyril. The holy evangelists contradict themselves when they say Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, following Matthew 28:11, late on the Sabbath, when the first of the week began to dawn, came to the tomb, according to Mark. However, after it began to be daylight and the sun had risen, and according to Matthew, they saw an angel, 28:2. According to Mark, a young man, 16:5. And according to Matthew, they left and told the disciples about the resurrection of Christ, 28:8. According to Mark, they were silent and told no one nothing, 16:8. By means of these things, he brings censure to the Holy Scriptures and says they contradict each other. And it's amazing. Like when I listen to Cornthwaite and McClellan and Bart Ehrman, that this type of thing is almost verbatim, that they're just trying to pit these gospels and stories against one another. But when you read the details, there's no contradiction. Like sometimes Jesus would heal someone and say, don't tell anyone, because at that particular period of time, he didn't want massive crowds in that particular town. But then other times he did things openly and lots of people came out. And it would say that there's so many people, they're worried that he's going to be crushed. They put him in a boat. This type of thing was happening, and he was fine with that. But then there are other times he told people to be quiet, and they didn't. And then there were massive crowds, but he was like, he had to move on and do other things because he had plans. So what they do is they say Jesus's main narrative was not to let anyone know. It's like, well, no, he has heaps of different purposes, not just one main thing. This is the unreasonableness that we see. And obviously there's been skeptics of truth and of Christianity all the way through the ages. Helg says, an early claim about Mary Magdalene is that she was a prostitute. Therefore, it must be true. Well, it's old, the oldest and best testimony. Yes.
Gospel. Dr. Ehrman also shares this view, asserting that the resurrection accounts in the Gospels are far too contradictory to be considered reliable historical sources.
And, as we continue to go through all the skeptics, what you see is Bart Ehrman just makes this stuff up, like out of thin air, or just copies someone, an ancient source which hasn't really been double checked. It's just a good story, and he's like, well, let's run with that, you know. And the thing is too, they also get rid of the last 12 verses of Mark, which has, you know, 1,654 manuscripts have the last 12 verses of Mark. Only 2 don't, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. So Bart Ehrman, being the good product of the Academy, he's going with the Nestle Alarm text, going with the fact that it shouldn't be in there, but 99.99% of all Christians have had it in their Bibles. But no, let's say it's not in there, it's not genuine, and then say, well, there's contradictions because you know, Jesus didn't, the last 12 verses of Mark never happened, so Jesus never talked to them about anything and explained things, and so they call that a contradiction. So they're actually creating their own contradictions. Because, you know, to me, people like Bart Ehrman, people in the Academy are just Bart Ehrmans who stay in a church group or are just involved with the Unitarians or the Catholics or whatever, some cult. But Bart Ehrman's just gone, I'm going to say I'm an atheist because that's what I think, you know, but his views aren't that much different to, you know, Roman Catholics who are in the Academy, or Unitarians or Mormons. So it says here, Dr. Ehrman, contradictions in the Gospels. Read through the accounts and ask yourself some basic questions. Who was the first person to go to the tomb? Was it Mary Magdalene by herself in John, or Mary among another Mary in Matthew, along with another Mary in Matthew? If you just read the next verse, it says the women. It's in the plural. And so it's like there's no contradiction whatsoever. And all of these things have been answered so thoroughly, but, you know, don't let the pesky facts get in the way of a bestseller. Or Mary along with another Mary and Salome in Mark, or Mary, Joanna, and a number of other women in Luke. Was the stone already rolled away when they arrived at the tomb? Mark, Luke, and John, or explicitly not in Matthew? Whom did they see there? An angel in Matthew, or a man, Mark, or 2 men in Luke? Did they immediately go and tell some of the disciples that they had seen John, or now Matthew, Mark, Luke, or that they had seen, or now Matthew, Mark, Luke? What did the person or people at the tomb tell the women what to do? To tell the disciples that Jesus would meet them in Galilee, Matthew and Mark, or to remember that Jesus had told them earlier when they had been in Galilee, Luke? Did the women then go tell the disciples that they were told, what they were told to them, Matthew, Luke, and John, or not in Mark? Or Mark doesn't have the last 12 verses, so they obviously didn't. According to the Academy, where did they see him? Only in Galilee, Matthew, or in Jerusalem, Luke? There are other discrepancies, but this is enough to get the point across. Yeah, so that's How Did Jesus Become God, page 134. And yeah, this type of thing's been answered over and over and over. If you don't think they have, I'll debate anyone in the world on this. This is easily proven wrong. Now, there are YouTube channels that I'll just throw one up that answer this type of thing. And they're not even TR people, so they have a different view. If we look at, say, Testify. So Testify have, a huge amount of playlists talking about this type of thing. Did Paul hijack Christianity? The Trinity in the Old Testament? Did Jesus think he was God? So, going through the claims of atheists and skeptics and Bart Ehrman, etc. It might even have this one here. Resurrection of Jesus. I like a whole playlist on the resurrection of Jesus. And the good thing is a lot of these only just go for 5 minutes. You know, they're quite quick, punchy. Women witnesses and Jesus' empty tomb revisited. So stuff from, Lydia McGrew, she's got some interesting things. Now, none of these people are Textus Receptus people. So, to me, sometimes they will answer something, but they'll actually create a couple of problems while they're doing it. Like, to me, the best position is the Textus Receptus position that Jonathan has. There was a guy recently I tuned into, and he seems to be coming again. He has a whole channel dedicated to Bart Ehrman stuff. So I'll just see if I can find that. Bart Ehrman. No, that's it. There was another one. Data over dogma, that's Dan McClellan. So Lydia McGrew, she's been on this channel. We interviewed her, and she's got some very interesting things to say. But I don't recommend her ultimate conclusions. She sort of, gets you most of the way, and then it's sort of like, she'll say that there are mistakes in the Bible and stuff like that, which I'm not in agreement with. But anyway, I'll move away from that. I just thought I'd give you, because I'm not going to go through and do all this, because he's mentioning like 10 different issues, and for me to go through that and just go, okay, well, let's just prove all this. There's 3 hours there just in explaining it. So maybe that's for another time. So Jonathan has gone for, I think, probably about maybe 10 minutes of his opening 25 minutes. So obviously we're not going to finish that. Hudson says Testify has some good videos. Yeah, they're very good. Very punchy and very well informed.
Nevertheless, their arguments are inconsequential. Resurrection accounts in the Gospels are far too contradictory to be considered reliable historical sources. Nevertheless, their arguments are inconsequential. No one is obligated to believe the women, the disciples, the statements in the Gospels, Paul, or the 500 witnesses in Corinthians, given that the account of Jesus' resurrection provides falsifiable criteria that can be properly investigated and covered, constituting our third point in the debate.
Okay, so the third point, how to falsify the resurrection of Jesus.
All that is required to falsify the resurrection of Jesus is either one, produce in legal terms the corpus delicti, that is the body of the crime perpetrated by the Galileans, in a manner similar to how Rome achieved these ends against another religious cult, Bacchus, in 188 BC, by uncovering evidence of widespread criminal acts through informant testimony, resulting in mass arrests and the execution of cult members. Two.
Okay, so we don't want to just skip over this. So Livy on how Rome conducted investigations against religious cults. Now that's just a blur. I can't read that, but it has the Roman investigation of the Bacchus cult. So I'd just throw this out there. Maybe Jonathan Sheffield could make his slides available online somewhere. Maybe like, just upload them all onto his Facebook account or something like that. Not so much that so I can go through them here, where it would be nice to do that, but just so like something like that it's really good information. And oftentimes I'm copying information into my Textus Receptus website, and probably not that quotation, but there would be others if that's small there that appear later on that might be important. And I guess other people are investigating these things as well. So the Bacchus cult, let's look at the Bacchus cult. Bacchus. Now remember, was it Alexander Hislop in the Two Babylons? He talks about Easter is Ishtar, is Lucifer, is Satan, is Bacchus. And he just had like 40 different names, and they're all the same god. You know, it's like, no, like some of them are identical. It's just whether it's in Hebrew or in Latin or in Greek or whatever. But definitely they have their own distinctions as well. So, all right, so I'll read through this. The 186 BCE Bacchanalia scandal was a Roman state crackdown on a mystery cult devoted to Bacchus, Dionysius, involving alleged conspiracies of sexual violence, murder, and political subversion. Sounds like the Epsteins. Roman authorities, driven by fear of social disorder and the cult secrecy, banned the gatherings, resulting in thousands of executions and severe restrictions, according to historian Livy. So Dionysius, I'm pretty sure that's mentioned in the book of Acts. The ancient Greek religion and myth, Dionysius is the god of winemaking, orchards and fruit, vegetation, fertility, festivity, insanity, ritual madness, religious ecstasy, and theatre. He was also known as Bacchus by the Greeks, a name later adopted by the Romans for a frenzy he is said to induce, called Bacchia. His wine, music, ecstatic dance were considered to free his followers from self-conscious fear and care and subvert the oppressive restraints of the powerful. Okay, so that's the Bacchus cult, Dionysius. The Bible mentions a man named Dionysius who was converted by Paul in Athens. Yeah, interesting. Anyway, so so this is according to Livy. So they had this cult. The Romans went through and killed lots of them and basically wiped that off the planet.
Resulting in mass arrests and the execution of cult members. 2, provide a credible tome from the ancient world that offers a naturalistic explanation of the event, like Lucian's treaty on the false prophet, which could be published against the Christians and spread throughout the empire. Or 3, uncover the true identities of the gospel authors, assuming they were not the disciples of Jesus, and expose their myth, regardless of the publication date. Comparable to the case reported by Tertullian in Asia Minor of a presbyter who was identified and deposed for composing a fictional text in the name of Paul. Remember.
Okay, so most people would know who Tertullian is, but he's just being mentioned here. Tertullian was a prolific early Christian author from Carthage in the Roman province of Africa. He was the first Christian author to produce an extensive corpus of Latin Christian literature and was an early Christian apologist, polemicist against heresy, including contemporary Christian Gnosticism. Okay, so he's been called the father of Latin Christianity. So very important guy. And so he was born around 155 and died after 220. So he was in Carthage. So the African side of the Mediterranean. down the bottom there. So it says here, presbyter identified and disposed for composing a fictional text in the name of Paul in Asia Minor. So this is Tertullian in his treatise on baptism, section 17. But of the writings which wrongly go under Paul's name claim Thecla's example as a license for women's teaching and baptizing, let them know that in Asia the presbyter who composed that writing, as if he were augmenting Paul's fame from his own store, after being convicted and confessing that he had done it from love of Paul, was removed from his office. So someone wrote a bit of a fictional account talking about women preaching or women teaching and baptizing, and he was removed from his church office there. So let's just listen again to that.
Could be published against the Christians and spread throughout the empire. Or 3, uncover the true identities of the gospel authors, assuming they were not the disciples of Jesus, and expose their myth, regardless of the publication date. Comparable to the case reported by Tertullian in Asia Minor of a presbyter who was identified and deposed for composing a fictional text in the name of Paul. Remember, Paul advanced this argument during his hearing before Festus, the prefect of Judea, and Agrippa, the king of Galilee, in which he defended the resurrection of Jesus, explicitly stating that the king knoweth of these things, before whom I also speak freely. For I am persuaded that none of these things are hidden from him, for this thing was not done in a corner.
So Paul demonstrates that the resurrection of Jesus is a falsifiable event. Acts chapter 26, verses 24 to 28. Now, as he thus made his defense, Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, you are beside yourself. Much learning is driving you mad. But he said, I am not mad, most noble Festus, but speak the words of truth and reason. For the king, before whom I also speak freely, knows these things, for I am convinced that none of these things escapes his attention, since this thing was not done in a corner.
None of these things are hidden from him, for this thing was not done in a corner. Simply put, the resurrection of Jesus constitutes a historical and falsifiable event. Festus and Agrippa were well aware of the events that transpired in their respective jurisdictions and could have easily refuted Paul's claim if the resurrection of Jesus were indeed a hoax, which would have been published against the Christians and spread throughout the empire. The basis for this conclusion is not speculation, but the fact that Eusebius records in his history that forged memoranda of Pilate and Jesus were published under Emperor Maximinius around 311 AD and sent to every district under his command with written instructions that they should be publicly posted for the view of all in every place, both in country and city, and that the schoolmasters should give them to their scholars to study. This reveals not only the empire's desire to challenge the alleged resurrection of Jesus, but also the methods by which it could be convincingly falsified. Were Festus and Agrippa...
Okay, so Emperor Maximinius II attempt to falsify Jesus and the resurrection, the forged acts of Pilate. Okay, so we are looking at Eusebius. So I'll just quickly show you who Eusebius is. He's a prolific author, and he wrote a history of Christianity. So Eusebius, from about 260 to 340 roughly, was a historian of Christianity, exegete, Christian polemicist from the Roman province of Syria, Palestina. In about AD 314, he became bishop of Caesarea Maritima. A scholar of the biblical canon, and is regarded as one of the most learned Christians during late antiquity. He wrote the demonstrations of the gospel, preparations for the gospel, and on discrepancies between the Gospels, studies of the biblical text. So he was prolific in what he wrote. Many of the works of the ancient church writers, like say Papias, you only find them in the works of Eusebius. We don't have the originals anymore. There, even like Marcion, you don't find his works, but you find they're written about in works like Eusebius and other people. And so, very important guide to get into and to learn. I actually typed into ChatGPT the other day, like if I listened to the whole of the writings of Eusebius, how long would it take? And I think it was like 5 hours, which didn't seem long. And it gave me a link to a YouTube clip that just read all of his works. And so I thought, oh, that'd be cool just to go through and spend that 5 hours just going through it and thinking about everything that's being said. But yeah, he's commonly quoted. So I just sort of mentioned that, even though his name is just in passing here. But he does say here, having therefore forged acts of Pilate and our Savior, full of every kind of blasphemy against Christ, they sent them with the emperor's approval to the whole of the empire subject to him, with written commands that they should be openly posted to view of all in every place, both in country and in city, that the schoolmasters should give them to their scholars instead of their customary lessons to be studied and learnt by heart. And so, so that's interesting. I'm reading the ones that if Jonathan Sheffield reads through the whole thing word by word, I'll leave it and skip over it. But if he doesn't, sometimes he's skipping over things, or he has a shortened summary, and that's when I'll read the whole thing.
Also the methods by which it could be convincingly falsified. Were Festus and Agrippa unable to exercise the to falsify the Christian narrative that was evident in the mind of Maximinius? By no means. Furthermore, by implementing this course of action, the empire revealed its hand in a manner that materially strengthens our case for the resurrection. The act of forging Pilate's memoranda explicitly suggests that an original imperial record existed, containing credible intelligence about the events in Judea. It is worth noting that Christians had long petitioned the empire to release the official acts of Pilate. Therefore, as emperor, why would Maximinius need to publish a forged memorandum from Pilate when he had access to the official empire's records in Caesarea? The evidence suggests he had something to hide.
So it's very interesting. I will go back and look at some of these, but I'll just let it run for a bit. I'll let Jonathan talk because we don't want to lose a train of thought.
We have on record 2 ancient witnesses, Justin and Tertullian, who not only affirm that Pilate's acts existed, but also provide testimony about their contents, which corroborates the principal assertions of the gospel, thereby furnishing our case with a body of testimony from an objective and impartial source. Justin Martyr in 150 AD published his...
Okay, so we'll just go back a bit. So I guess what Jonathan is arguing here is saying Pontius Pilate would have mentioned a lot about the resurrection. Okay, this claim would have been talked about. It wasn't, but the people who were trying to sort of cover this up and make out that really nothing happened. They stole the body. It was mostly the Jews, according to the historical and biblical records. And so he would have looked into these claims, and they would have been written down somewhere. And the Roman records existed proving the resurrection, So this is a claim from Sheffield. But these records didn't survive. But there was a forgery that went around talking about some really strange things about Christianity. And so Jonathan says, was Festus and Agrippa unable to exercise the foresight to falsify the Christian narrative that was evident in the mind of Maximin II?
Maximinius? By no means. Furthermore, by implementing...
Now, I'll just read this. Or he's actually reading the whole thing, I think.
Implementing this course of action, the empire revealed its hand in a manner that materially strengthens our case for the resurrection. The act of forging Pilate's memoranda explicitly suggests that an original imperial record existed, containing credible intelligence about the events in Judea. It is...
It's sort of like release the Epstein files. I like that. Yeah, release the documents.
Worth noting that Christians had long petitioned the empire to release the official acts of Pilate. Therefore, as emperor...
Okay, so on this picture, it's got release of documents, acts of Pilate now. Justin, in his first apology, says that Tertullian says that Justin, Martyr, and Tertullian petitioned the empire for the acts of Pilate. So that's very interesting because I wonder if those will ever be found, this type of documentation.
Had long petitioned the empire to release the official acts of Pilate. Therefore, as emperor, why would Maximinius need to publish a forged memorandum from Pilate when he had access to the official empire's records in Caesarea? The evidence suggests he had something to hide. We have on record two ancient witnesses, Justin and Tertullian, who not only affirm that Pilate's acts existed, but also provide testimony about their contents, which corroborates the principal assertions of the gospel, thereby furnishing our case with a body of testimony from an objective and impartial source. Justin.
So, yeah, that's it. The fourth point. There was an official report from Pilate corroborating the primary assertions of the Gospels, providing our case with an objective and impartial source. And so, okay, interesting. And let's continue.
With a body of testimony from an objective and impartial source. Justin Martyr in 150 AD published his defense of Christianity to the Emperor Antonius and the Roman Senate. In that defense, he cites prophecies concerning Jesus, his life, death, and resurrection, and refers 3 times into that same work to the acts recorded under Pontius Pilate, attesting all these events took place, as you can verify from the Acts of Pilate. Tertullian addressed...
Okay, so it says here, Justin Martyr appealed to the Acts of Pilate. And as the prophet spoke, they tormented him and set him on the judgment seat and said, "Judge us." And the expression, "they pierced my hands and my feet," was used in reference to the nails of the cross, which were fixed in his hands and his feet. And after he was crucified, they cast lots upon his vesture, and they that crucified him parted it among them. And that these things did happen, you can ascertain from the Acts of Pontius Pilate, First Apology 35. And it was predicted that our Christ should heal all diseases and raise the dead. Hear what was said: at his coming the lame shall leap as an hart, and the tongue of the stammerer shall be clear speaking. The blind shall see, and the lepers shall be cleansed, and the dead shall rise and walk about. Isaiah 35:6. And that he did these things, you can learn from the Acts of Pontius Pilate, First Apology. So very interesting that Justin Martyr is appealing to this. And so I should show you really who Justin Martyr is. Very famous early church writer. Just in case you don't know. Justin Martyr, the philosopher, obviously Martyr wasn't his last name, and he was given that after he died as well, just so you know. So from about 90, maybe to 100 AD to 165, known as Justin the Philosopher, was an early Christian apologist and philosopher. Most of his works are now lost, but 2 apologies and a dialogue did survive. The first apology, his most well-known text, passionately defends the morality of the Christian life and provides various ethical and philosophical arguments to convince the Roman Emperor Antonius Pius to abandon the persecution of the church. Further, he also indicates, as St. Augustine would later, regarding the true religion that revealed itself as Christianity, that the seeds of Christianity, manifestations of the Logos acting in history, actually predated Christ's incarnation. This notion allows him to claim many historical Greek philosophers, including Socrates and Plato. In those works, he was well studied as unknowing Christians. So he's saying that these guys sort of knew the gospel in a roundabout way because, you know, of certain things they said. Justin was martyred along with some of his students, and he's venerated as a saint by the Catholic Church, Eastern Orthodox Church, the Oriental Orthodox Churches, Lutheran churches, and Anglicanism. So just so you know who he is. And he is around about the time the book of Revelation was finished. He was born and he lived for about 70 years. Okay. So he's the one saying that you need to look at the acts of Pontius Pilate.
Took place, as you can verify from the Acts of Pilate. Tertullian addressed the Roman magistrates in his apology to affirm the divinity of Jesus, highlighting his miracles and resurrection. He referred twice to a report submitted by Pilate to Tiberius that confirmed these events and openly challenged the Roman authorities to consult their histories on the matter.
Okay, very interesting. So Tertullian appeals to Roman archives and the reports from Pilate to Tiberius. Tiberius, accordingly, in whose days the Christian name made its entry into the world, having himself received intelligence from Palestine of events which had clearly shown the truth of Christ's divinity, consult your histories, Tertullian Apology, chapter 5. He, Pilate, sent word of him, Jesus, to the reigning Caesar, who was at the time Tiberius. Tertullian Apology, chapter 21.
Openly challenged the Roman authorities to consult their histories on the matter. Although these reports aren't conclusive, we will present a comprehensive collection of circumstantial evidence to establish a set of substantial facts from one which can logically infer and corroborate the reports in question, thereby affirming the resurrection of Jesus. First,
okay, the circumstantial evidence substantiating Justin and Tertullian's report, thereby affirming the resurrection of Jesus. So there's a chain of circumstances. Pilate's acts existed. Records of the empire were available for future administrations and public for inspection. It was obligatory to report to the emperor any novel events in the provinces. Motivating factors of the ruling authorities to investigate and gather intelligence on Jesus, the disciples, and the veracity of the resurrection. Turning point for the ruling authorities in the aftermath of the crucifixion to investigate the claims of an alleged resurrection of Jesus. Key aspects of Justin and Tertullian's reports that are consistent with Tiberius's administration. Very interesting.
Reports in question, thereby affirming the resurrection of Jesus. First, let's establish the type of records produced by the empire relevant to our case and their accessibility to future administrations and the public for inspection. Regarding
So chain of circumstances, types of records produced by the empire relevant to our case and their accessibility to future administrations and the public for inspection. So I guess it's like, looking into the history of the CIA in Ecuador or something like that. Those documents are there. There might be redactions or whatever today, but back then people were able to look at this type of thing and to verify historical circumstances.
To future administrations and the public for inspection. Regarding Pilate's act, Cicero confirms that the prefect of Judea was required to deposit 2 copies of his account in the 2 principal cities of his province and place 1 in the treasury. For context, the trial, sentence, and crucifixion of Jesus were official acts of Pilate in his administration of Roman authority, and the law was imperative regarding Pilate's duty to report, especially charges against one who had disturbed the peace and was guilty of treason against the throne.
So chain of circumstances, requirement for Pilate to create and deposit his records, the availability for inspection by future administration. So people who looked into these things, like, can you imagine if you read Pilate's account? And perhaps that's a very interesting thing to take into consideration when Paul is standing before Festus and Agrippa. Like, what do they know? What have they read? What have they looked at? What did the Romans know? People who were in authority and had access to these type of things, what did they know that others didn't? What did Pilate write down? And Justin Martyr is sort of like, well, these things are mentioned in the Acts of Pontius Pilate, and he was obliged to write these things down. I guess it's like, the CIA, writing out a narrative for what happened, and it goes into the classified files and all the rest of it. And then 50 years later, it's like, it was that guy. He did this and he did that. And so these things had to be written. That it wasn't like he could just leave things out. This is the way that the Roman world worked. So Marcus Tullius, Cicero, 106 to 43 BC, it says the governor of a province had to account at Rome for his administration from his own books and was bound to deposit 2 copies of his accounts to the 2 chief cities of his province and provide a copy for the treasury. So that's the Temple of Jupiter by Cicero. Very interesting information.
Against one who had disturbed the peace and was guilty of treason against the throne.
So it says here, chain or circumstances, records of the empire available for future administrations and the public for inspection. Caesar's very first enactment after becoming a consul was that the proceedings both of the Senate and of the people should day by day be compiled and published. That's Suetonius, the life of Julius Caesar. So in Acta Diurna, and so that is written between 59 BC and AD 222. It has daily acts, sometimes translated as daily public records, were daily Roman official notices, a sort of daily gazette that were carved in stone or metal and displayed on message boards in public places like the Forum of Rome. Sometimes scribe made copies of the acta and sent them to provincial governors for information. Later emperors used them to announce royal or senatorial decrees and court events. Tacitus and Suetonius used the acta as sources for the histories of Rome's early emperors. I, Suetonius, myself, in the Gazette that he, Caligula, first saw the light at Antium, And so it's got the reference there. This is very difficult to read, this blurry writing, but I'm trying. Tacitus Tacitus directly cites the acta, and so it's actually very hard to read that. But these are just records, and so basically they were to give an account. These are examples of people giving an account, and these things were posted in Rome so that people could read them. I guess it's like a daily newspaper update. And you can imagine something like Rome, being as rigorous as, say, the German army in World War II. They would have had to have said exactly what happened to Hitler, not gloss it over. If someone did something wrong, they would just say it. And if those people had to be executed, they were. If someone betrayed Hitler, they would just say it, And so oftentimes you see these amazing things like Rommel just get dragged out of his house or he actually chose to shoot himself rather than be killed in front of his family. But like a war hero. And then there was rumors that he was plotting against Hitler, and they're just like, kill him, And so you can see the Romans were sort of a bit like that. And they were very meticulous at documenting everything. So it seems like they had that type of thing happening as well. Sorry, I can't read through all that. Maybe we can get these from Jonathan and look at them another time. But I don't think it really matters. We can just move on to the next slide.
Remember, Julius Caesar's first enactment was that the proceedings of both the Senate and the people should be compiled and disseminated daily for public consumption. Tacitus and Suetonius used these acta as sources for their histories of Rome's early emperors. Given their respective backgrounds, Tertullian's legal and imperial connection, and Justin's residence in Rome, they were well positioned to access the official documents cited in their works.
Okay. Chain of circumstances, records of the empire available for future administrations and public for inspection. Eusebius on Tertullian's legal background. Tertullian, a man well versed in the laws of the Romans and in other respects of high repute, and one of those especially distinguished in Rome. So that's what Eusebius said about Tertullian. And Jerome on Tertullian. We should all know who Jerome is. He did the Latin Bible. Jerome on Tertullian, imperial connections. He was from the province of Africa, from the city of Carthage, where his father was a proconsular centurion. So very well-informed author. And then we've got references to official Roman records on the works of Justin and Tertullian, which again is very small and it would be difficult for me to read through that. But these are basically like the footnotes for all that. And so Justin talking about the records, Tertullian talking about the census records. It's very interesting history. And it's interesting too that regardless of whether we have or ever will have access to what Pontius Pilate wrote, we do have church historians and just historians in general talking about these things, which is very helpful and very interesting. And so we do have, we only have a few crumbs of information, but it's enough to show us these type of things. And I really appreciate Jonathan Sheffield bringing this stuff to light.
Position to access the official documents cited in their works. Secondly, Tertullian's assertion that Pilate reported to Tiberius the account of Jesus and the resurrection is entirely consistent with the evidence. According to Eusebius, under an ancient custom observed among provincial governors, it was obligatory to report to the emperor any novel events to ensure that nothing was concealed from the emperor.
Okay, so chain of circumstances, it was obligatory to report to the emperor any novel events in the provinces. So if anything was a little bit different, they had to explain these things. So reporting novel occurrences to the emperor. Eusebius said, in accordance with the ancient custom which prevailed among the rulers of the provinces of reporting to the emperor the novel occurrences which took place in them, in order that nothing might escape him. So it's very, very well documented. Things were, they weren't just overlooked, they weren't just fudged. And I guess too, this would be a type of judgment that would be upon someone like Pilate, of whether he's going to be truthful or not. And there would have been, spies looking at that. There would have been other people who would have to verify things, and just to see if what he's saying was true, because he might have made some pretty big mistakes, and that would have to be confessed and talked about, and this type of thing.
The emperor any novel events to ensure that nothing was concealed from the emperor. As an example of such reporting is Pliny the Younger's correspondence to Emperor Trajan. For context, it was the increasing popularity of Christianity, which Pliny regarded as a contagious superstition spreading throughout the province, that necessitated a report to Trajan as a matter requiring the emperor's immediate attention.
Okay, so I'll just read through this. Chain of circumstances. It was obligatory to report to the emperor any novel events in the provinces. Pliny's letter to Emperor Trajan. And I guess I'll get Trajan up. And we have a nice bust of Trajan. Here he is, looking very nice there with his frostbitten nose. Trajan, born in 53, died in 117, was a Roman emperor from 98 to 117, remembered as the second of the 5 good emperors of the Nerva Antonine dynasty. He was a philanthropic ruler and a successful soldier emperor who presided over one of the greatest military expansions in Roman history, during which, by the time of his death, the Roman Empire reached its maximum territorial extent. He was given the title of Optimus Princeps, the best ruler, by the Roman Senate. So he was legendary in Rome. So just sort of point that out. So here we have Pliny's letter to the emperor. It is my custom, sir, to refer to you in all cases where I do not feel sure for who can better direct my doubts or inform my ignorance. I have never been present at any legal examination of the Christians, and I do not know, therefore, what are the usual penalties passed upon them, or the limits of those penalties, or how searching and inquiry should be made. I thought it more necessary, therefore, to find out what truth there was in these statements by submitting 2 women who were called deaconesses to the torture, but I found nothing but a debased superstition carried to great lengths. So I postponed my examination and immediately consulted you. The matter seems to me worthy of your consideration, especially as there are so many involved in the danger, for the contagion of this superstition is spread not only through the free cities, but into villages and the rural districts.
To Trajan as a matter requiring the emperor's immediate attention. Given the volatile post-resurrection climate, reports circulating about the alleged resurrection of Jesus, and the climate of fear in Tiberius's administration following Sergianus's execution, Pilate would not risk concealing the event from Tiberius. To prevent accusations of failing to manage the crisis and to control the narrative, Pilate would have issued a report to Tiberius justifying his actions.
Okay, so chain of circumstances, it was obligatory to report to the emperor any novel events of the provinces. Motivating factors, Christian mobilization efforts at Pentecost in Jerusalem, Acts chapter 2. Peter and the disciples publicly preaching the resurrection of Jesus, Acts 2, climate of fear in Tiberius's administration following Sejanus' execution, Tacitus. Reporting novel occurrences to the emperor. So this is Tacitus Annuals 6, and it says, though 3 years has elapsed since the destruction of Sejanus, neither time in treaties nor sated gratification, all which have a soothing effect on others, softened Tiberius, or kept him from publishing doubtful or forgotten offences as most flagrant and recent crimes.
Pilate would have issued a report to Tiberius justifying his actions. Lastly, what would have compelled Pilate or Herod to investigate and gather intelligence on Jesus, the disciples, and the veracity of the alleged resurrection? Simply put, why would Pilate, Herod, or the empire have even cared?
Okay, so it just says here, chain of circumstances, motivating factors of the ruling authorities to investigate and gather intelligence on Jesus, the disciples, and the veracity of the resurrection.
Put, why would Pilate, Herod, or the empire have even cared? For the same reason Pilate was concerned about a Samaritan prophet who had assembled a multitude to ascend Mount Gerizim in search of sacred artifacts, and about Galilean worshippers offering sacrifices in the temple, because Pilate perceived the gatherings as a rebellious uprising rather than a religious exercise.
Okay, so chain of circumstances, motivating factors of the ruling authorities to investigate and gather intelligence on Jesus, the disciples, and the veracity of the resurrection. So this is to prevent an uprising. Josephus in Jewish Antiquities 1885 to 89, the Samaritan nation was not exempt from disturbance, for a man who made light of mendacity, and in all his designs catered to the mob, rallied them, bidded them to go in a body with them to Mount Gerizim, which in their belief is the most sacred of mountains. He assured them that on their arrival he would show them the sacred vessels which were buried there where Moses had deposited them. And so it's very difficult to read that, but it just says down the bottom in Luke 13:1, there were present at that season some who told him of the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with their sacrifices. So that's Josephus 1885 to 89, if you want to look that up. It's just a little bit hard to read that.
As a rebellious uprising rather than a religious exercise. More importantly, Pilate would be especially concerned about how Tiberius would interpret his handling of the situation surrounding Jesus. Having been severely reprimanded by Tiberius for his mismanagement of the Gilded Shields incident, Pilate could not afford another crisis. Pilate's mindset is no different.
Okay, so chain of circumstances, motivating factors of the ruling authorities to investigate and gather intelligence on Jesus, the disciples, and the veracity of the resurrection. I know I'm saying that every time, but sometimes it is different. Pilate will be concerned about how Tiberius would interpret the handling of the situation surrounding Jesus. Philo, Embassy 299 to 300, Jews, wrote a most supplicatory letter to Tiberius, and he, Tiberius, when he had read it, what did he say of Pilate, and what threats did he utter against him? But it is beside our purpose and present to relate to you how very angry he, Tiberius, was. For immediately, without putting anything off till the next day, he, Tiberius, wrote a letter reproaching and reviling him, that's Pilate, in the most bitter manner for his unprecedented audacity and wickedness, and commanding him immediately to take down the shields and convey them away from the metropolis of Judea and Caesarea.
Pilate could not afford another crisis. Pilate's mindset is no different than that of Antipas. Josephus records that Antipas imprisoned and executed John the Baptist to prevent an uprising. Understandably, Antipas would not risk being blamed and deposed for a messianic uprising, as his brother was. Remember.
Okay, so to prevent an uprising, Josephus, Jewish Antiquities, for Herod had killed this good man, John the Baptist, who had commanded the Jews to exercise virtue, righteousness towards one another, and piety toward God. Okay, so I'm not going to read the rest of that except for the stuff that's in yellow because it seems highlighted for a reason. It says, Herod, who feared that the great influence John had over the masses might put them into his power and enable him to raise a rebellion, for they seemed ready to do anything he should advise, though it best to put him to death. And then it says, Archelaus also retaliated against an angry crowd of the Pharisees during Passover, attempting to thwart a possible rebellion by executing about 3,000 of them. Wow. And then it says, finally in 6 AD, he, Archelaus, was banished to Gaul, and his territory became the province of Judea, directly under the control of the Romans. And so, yeah, so it's very interesting. They, I guess, anywhere that Rome went, they were responsible for the type of uprisings and problems that happened. And like, can you imagine some of the places they were in outright war against the people? And so there would have been attacks against them constantly. But yeah, very interesting.
Posed for a messianic uprising, as his brother was. Remember that the Pharisees explicitly warned Jesus that Herod sought to kill him. They accused Jesus of stirring up the people and perverting the nation, and sent spies to monitor him in Jerusalem, indicating that Jesus' influence over the people could lead to rebellion.
So it says, Luke 13:1, the same day there came certain of the Pharisees, saying unto him, Jesus, get thee out and depart hence, for Herod will kill thee. Luke 23:2-5 says, and they began to accuse him, saying, we found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ a king. And they were the more fierce, saying, he stirreth up the people, teaching throughout all Jewry, beginning from Galilee to this place. And Luke 20:20 says, and they watched him and sent forth spies, which should feign themselves just men, that they might take hold of his words, so that they might deliver him unto the power and authority of the governor. Very interesting. So Jesus' influence over the people could lead to rebellion. So I guess anyone with any certain type of power, any cult that rose up, they were very fascinated with this and very interested in this, and they wanted to know about it.
Indicating that Jesus' influence over the people could lead to rebellion. Furthermore, Eusebius even reports that after the final overthrow of Jerusalem, Vespasian ordered a thorough search of all who claimed descent from the house of David to eliminate any hope of restoring the royal house of the Messiah, as the empire was highly concerned about insurrection. This demonstrates the perceived threats that the Roman emperor and his lieutenants would associate with a movement like that of Jesus and his disciples. Moreover, in the aftermath movement like that of Jesus and his disciples. Moreover,
okay, so we saw Richie Carrier there. I just want to see what that is.
A movement like that of Jesus and his disciples.
What would have taken, that might be the next slide, taken for the Roman Empire to investigate the resurrection of Jesus. So this is Dr. Richard Carrier says, if the tomb was empty and Christ's followers reported that he continued preaching to them and remained at large, Pilate would be compelled to assume an escape had occurred and would have to haul every Christian and interrogate every possible witness in a massive manhunt for what would only be, to his mind, an escaped convict who was not only guilty for treason against Rome for claiming to be God and king, as all the Gospels allege, but now also guilty of escaping justice, and continuing to lead a rebellion. And the Sanhedrin would feel the equally compelling need to finish what had eventually failed, what they had eventually failed to accomplish the first time, finding and bringing Jesus to justice. So that's it says, "Sea carrier, why did Mark invent an empty tomb?" So I'm not sure if that appears, but it flashed and then it came back. Maybe it's the next slide after what we're going to see, but I just thought I'd read it anyway. So when we get there, it's already done.
Moreover, in the aftermath,
then we have chain of circumstances, turning point for the ruling authorities in the aftermath of the crucifixion to investigate the claims of an alleged resurrection of Jesus. And it has key point. In the immediate aftermath of Jesus' crucifixion, the propagation of a resurrection claim, if fraudulent, would be perceived by Pilate and the empire as a provocation to insurrection, necessitating swift repressive action to prevent civil unrest.
Of Jesus' crucifixion, the propagation of a resurrection claim, if fraudulent, would be perceived by Pilate and the empire as a provocation to insurrection, necessitating swift repressive action to prevent civil unrest. According to Dr. Richard Carrier, if the tomb was empty and Christ's followers reported that he continued preaching to them and remained at large, Pilate would be compelled to assume an escape had occurred and would have to haul every Christian in and interrogate every possible witness in a massive manhunt for what could only be, to his mind, an escaped convict, who was not only guilty of treason against Rome for claiming to be God and king, as all the Gospels allege, but now also guilty of escaping justice and continuing to lead a rebellion. And the Sanhedrin would feel the equally compelling need to finish what they had evidently failed to accomplish the first time, finding and bringing Jesus to justice. As Dr. Carrier correctly observes, none of this occurs. However, the pertinent question remains, why doesn't it occur? Considering 50 days after the purported resurrection of Jesus, Acts reports that the disciples mobilized the movement and spread the resurrection narrative among the masses in Jerusalem, swelling its ranks by 3,000 on Pentecost, thereby setting the stage for a rapid, widespread expansion. As Paul noted, the early church's leadership was anchored in Jerusalem, with the apostles directing operations from there. And central to early Christians' proclamation was the empty tomb. The consistent, multifaceted documentary evidence spanning Christian, Gnostic, Jewish, Greek, Syrian, and Roman sources supports the empty tomb, and there is no documentary evidence to the contrary. While I acknowledge Dr. Ehrman's...
Okay, so he has written here, Matthew 28, 1-10, women find the stone rolled away by an angel who declares he's not here, he's risen. So there's quite a lot of scripture given here. There's quotes from Justin Martyr, Tertullian, Toledot, Yeshu, many other people. And so, but the writing's so small, it's very difficult for me to read it. And so I would just suggest that people look at that themselves. Now, this is Christian and Gnostic sources consistent with an empty tomb. So there's a row there. Then it has Jewish sources consistent with an empty tomb. It's got a row there. Greek sources consistent with an empty tomb. Syrian sources consistent with an empty tomb. And Roman sources consistent with an empty tomb. So let's continue.
Greek, Syrian, and Roman sources supports the empty tomb, and there is no documentary evidence to the contrary.
That's really cool. And like Bart Ehrman said, this is one of the best explanations of the resurrection, one of the best defenses he's ever heard for the resurrection. And this is gold. This is really good stuff. And so I'm really enjoying going through this. Now, I've gone already for 3 hours and 16 minutes. I know I sometimes go for 4 hours and 5 hours and all the rest of it. But as you can probably tell, I'm a little bit tired. I was driving for maybe 10 hours yesterday, just doing shopping and running around the city in Brisbane and being crazy, joining the rat race, running around. But so I am a little bit tired, and I know when I listen to my own videos, sometimes I'd have to go back and check things. And if I am tired, I tend to mumble and say a lot. It's just the way it is after 3 hours and 17 minutes. But we'll just go through until we hit a point, because we're at the 24-minute mark here, and I can still see Jonathan's head at about the 30-minute mark. So 29:58 looks like when he stops. So we've still got about 5.5 minutes to go over, which that could stretch out to like an hour. And so I would rather be fresh and do it, and than torture you guys with just sloshing around. But I'll continue through until we get to a point where I feel that we've sort of made a point, or we've finished a thought, rather than be in the middle of something and have to catch up next time. So one of Dr. Ehrman's views against the burial tradition of Jesus. So this is in How Jesus Became God. It says, my third reason for doubting the burial tradition has to do with the Roman rule of Judea at the time. Pilate was not a I can't even say it. It just means he wasn't a good, perfect prefect who kindly listened to the protests of the people he governed. While Pilate, the sort of ruler who would break tradition in policy, was Pilate the sort of ruler who would break tradition in policy when kindly asked by a member of the Jewish council to provide a decent burial for a crucified victim? Not from what we can tell, Bart Ehrman, How Jesus Became God. But even just knowing the scriptures, it says that Pilate said he was innocent, and it was sort of the soldiers were so hungry to bash him and the Jews to crucify him. It's like it was already sort of starting to happen. And so he washed his hands and said the guy's innocent. So if someone came up and said, hey, can we give him a decent burial? I mean, the chances of him going, yeah, okay, he doesn't have to deal with it. So what's the, Bart just reads into these things, just nonsense. It says here, dramatic change in empirical policy by Tiberius toward the Jews following Sejanus' execution, October 31 AD, executive order. And I'll just read the highlighted bits here. It says, they took great care not to violate or attack any of the Jewish customs or laws. And the reign of Tiberius, things went on the same manner. It's very interesting. And it says here, he sent commands to all the governors of provinces in every country to comfort those of our nation in their respective cities, as the punishment intended to be inflicted was not meant to be inflicted upon all, but only on the guilty, and they were but few. And he ordered them to change none of the existing customs, but to look upon them as pledges, since the men were peaceful in the dispositions and natural characters, and their laws trained them and disposed them so quiet and to quiet and stability. So that was Philo. So as you can tell, I'm struggling to read that, and so I'll see what the next slide is, and maybe I might start reading comments and shutting it down.
While I acknowledge Dr. Ehrman's challenge to the traditional burial narrative, his portrayal of Pilate and the Roman policy in Judea is undermined by two major oversights. Firstly, Ehrman fails to incorporate the critical shift in imperial policy towards the Jews that followed the execution of Sejanus in 31 AD. Sejanus was not only extremely hostile to the Jews, but also spread several false accusations against them. Following Sergianus's execution, Tiberius sent an executive order to all provincial governors to cease harassing the Jews, but instead comfort them and respect their ancestral customs, treating their local laws as a mandated trust committed to their care to ensure their commitment to peace and stability in the provinces. Furthermore, in the wake of the Gilded Shield
Okay, so I will stop it there because it looks like there's lots more to read. But it seems like we're stopping at a point where he's pointing out some of the things that Bart Ehrman's claimed about, well, what would Pilate do? Pilate wouldn't do this because he wasn't a nice guy. So why would he do this and do that when Sheffield is just pointing out, well, it doesn't matter whether he was nice or whatever. They said to follow the local customs as much as possible. And so it seems like he's making a very good case against a lot of the claims in Bart Ehrman's book, How Jesus Became God. And so I think this will be a great spot to jump back in once we fire this up again in our next program. Now, I'll catch up with his comments. Ben Yeshurun, about an hour ago, said, John 11:25, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he die, yet he shall live. Shall stand forever is saying greetings in the name of Jesus. Hello, shall stand. TJ says, I want to see Bart Ehrman debate Sam Shamoon. Okay. Shall stand forever says, Sam is a Catholic. No, I'll pass. Yeah, and I mean, like Sam Shamoon is also very vitriolic. And so what he's said about me, like he will say, oh, Nick's good on Bible issues and all the rest of it. And he said, he's just a fundamentalist Baptist. Like, I'm not a Baptist. I'm, as far as being a fundamentalist Baptist, I don't think I fit into that mold. And he just made up a bunch of stuff about me. And I started talking on his chat, and he said something about my mother. He's pretty much Christianized swearing sort of thing, and talked about a cat urinating on me and my family or something. And I was like, whatever, dude. So he is like, completely toxic. So he's not a good example. And he's just a Catholic guy. He used to be a Protestant. The reason he knows stuff is because he was Protestant. If you actually just bypass him and go to other people who know the same sort of stuff, they'll say it, but without the vitriol. Defending the Trinity, etc. Helg says Jonathan is both a comic strip editor and a TR defender, an unusual coupling. He's very good. Rembrandt says there must be thousands of tombs with nobody in them worldwide. Are all those proof for a resurrection? Tiberius. Okay, I'm not really sure what you're getting at there. Boulder's Line says, awesome job, James. Love the cartoons too. Awesome job James did. Maybe you're meaning Jonathan. But his dad, James, is in the chat there. Yeah, like awesome job, James. Oh, no. I thought you were talking about his dad fathered him well, which he did. I guess both ways are good. And I think I'm done. So 3 hours and 25 minutes. And we're shutting this down. So I'll play my outro. Don't forget to like, subscribe, all the rest of that fancy stuff. And I'll continue doing this when I get time. I'm really enjoying this. I'm enjoying actually just going through and making sure I check the sources, and there's a name there. It's like, well, I might know who Eusebius is, but some people don't. They follow the channel. So just to guide people through this, I'm actually enjoying this a lot. And the thing is too, there are a lot of things that we just have to be humble on and recognize when someone knows a bunch of stuff that we don't. Now, sometimes, like say my Easter articles written in 2005, I'm quoting Eusebius, I'm quoting, Alfred Erdeshim and all these other people, and it's like most people have no idea who these people are when they first jump into this. And I didn't either. I had no idea. And so, and I'm not afraid to just say, look, I don't know, and just to look into things. And I really want to get up to speed on a lot of the Greek gods, Roman gods, because it does help, especially when you start reading things like Erasmus. These guys knew ancient Greek and Roman culture like the back of their hand. And so they'll talk about proverbs that come from a certain work of an ancient Latin writer. And it's like, I don't know who that is, but it's good just to come up to speed with some of these things. And I think with Jonathan, because of what he's saying, I think you can see the benefit of me going through and just slowly reading through this material. Sometimes when Jonathan goes through this, I can vague out a little bit because there are things that I haven't stopped and thought about. But just stopping it, thinking about it, making sure we hammer something home before we move on, I think it's very helpful. And so Rembrandt says, I was trying to show you how to pronounce Tiberius. It could be my Australian accent, I'm not really sure. Bold as a Lion says, thank you, Nick. Have a beautiful, blessed rest of your weekend. Thanks, Bold. And thanks, guys, for joining us. Let us know in the comments anything that you saw that was very helpful or wrong. If you think we're wrong, challenge us. But apart from that, I'll see you guys next time. I'll play my outro and we'll see you again soon.